Good morning. I'm going to call to order this regular meeting of the Zoning and Planning Committee for Thursday, February 6th. My name is Jeremy Schrader, and I'm the chair of this committee. With me at the dais are Councilmember Allison, Councilmember Wright, Councilmember Goodman, and Councilmember Gordon. Let the record reflect that we've got a quorum. We've got 9 items on today's agenda, including 4 quasi-judicial hearings and 2 ordinances, and we'll first dispense with the consent agenda. Item number 5 is an alley vacation application submitted by Pinnacle Management at Broadway and Brant Avenue North. This committee originally postponed this item last year, and I've been informed by the staff that there are some ownership issues that are still being resolved. I will move to continue this item to our March 19th meeting. Item number 6 is the setting of a public hearing for our next meeting to consider 3 appointments to the Planning Commission. Are there any questions on the consent agenda, or would any member like to pull anything off of the agenda? Not seeing anything, I move the approval of the consent agenda, including continuing item number 5 to the March 19th meeting. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and that motion carries. Now we'll return to the quasi-judicial hearing portion of the agenda, and we can handle items 1 and 2 together, as they're both appeals relating to the new mixed-use building located at 407 15th Avenue Southeast, 1412 and 1428 5th Avenue Southeast, as well as 1413 and 1417 4th Street Southeast. We opened these hearings at our meeting on January 9th, but the hearing was not closed at the request of the appellants who requested a delay. And before I reopen the hearing, I'll invite staff to give a presentation.
Good morning, council members. The project before you is a project in Dinkytown. It's located on the site of what is currently McDonald's. Also presently on the site is a liquor store, an existing legal non-conforming parking or drive-through, several surface parking spaces, and other one-story buildings. The Planning Commission took action on this application on December 9th. They approved most of the applications and denied some. So the applications that were denied were the application for a loading variance, application for a floor area ratio variance, and site plan review. Staff had recommended the same, and Planning Commission had upheld staff recommendation. 2 appeals were filed. One was filed by the applicant for the denials, and one was filed by Cordelia Pearson for the Planning Commission's decision to approve a parking variance and a conditional use permit to increase the maximum height from 4 stories to 10 stories. So the applicant had requested a delay in order to try to better respond to some of staff's concerns, specifically related to the floor area ratio and building bulk. Staff had recommended denial of the floor area ratio variance, specifically because the proposal to increase the floor area ratio from 3.78 to 6.04 was, something that was also exacerbated by the design of the building. So staff was supportive of the 10-story height here. The new 2040 plan does allow for increases to height as long as certain community benefits are provided, and I can get into that in a moment. So the applicant had requested this time. They were able to submit a revised loading diagram that provides a total of 4 small loading spaces, and the requirement is 3. So that application is able to be returned to the applicant. And the massing and building design have changed. Previously, an aerial view of the building, it would have been kind of a round shape with a larger central courtyard, and now it's backwards S with 2 smaller courtyards, which allows the building mass to step down and break up the long facades along the east and west elevations. And staff does feel that this design, much more so than any previous designs of the building, is doing a better job of breaking up that mass. So here's the site. This is the revised building, as you can see from this aerial view, the kind of overall shape, and then there's the smaller 6-story portions that are along those long facades that are able to break up that massing a bit more. And this is the site plan. The site plan itself is not changing much from what was brought to Planning Commission to this current design.
Thank you. We've got a quick question from Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Ms. Silas. I'm trying really hard to follow all of this. The picture that you showed previous, is that the plan with the variance to increase the floor area ratio from 3.7 to 6.04 that was denied by staff and planning commission?
No, this is the revised design that the applicant submitted kind of in that interim period between when they came to, the application was scheduled as DMP on January 9th.
And the FAR on this is what?
The exact same, 6.04.
So it's the same FAR, it's
It's
just
the
a
same
different,
FAR.
it's the same box, it's just making it look a little different.
Yes.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
And I have quite a few drawings in this presentation that will show the difference between what was initially proposed and brought to Planning Commission and what we're seeing today. So this is the revised loading diagram that does show kind of a pull-off area for the larger trucks, as well as the smaller loading spaces interior to the building that reduces the need for the loading variance. And then I'll go through these quickly. These are the elevations. So on the top are the elevations that were brought to Planning Commission, and then the revised elevations are below. So as you can tell, this elevation has not changed much. It's more the east and west elevation. So this is the west elevation that would be visible kind of from beyond the historic district as you move into the commercial district of Dinkytown. And so it is, has that smaller section that breaks it up a bit. And there's more brick on this elevation. The shorter elevations, like I mentioned, this one does have a bit of a smaller section along 4th Street now on the south elevation. And then the east elevation does show kind of that smaller building section that's able to, make a better attempt to break up that massing. And then here are a few renderings showing the before and after, so you can see how that looks in context. Those smaller building sections able to, make the building bulk seem a little bit smaller. Okay, so as I mentioned, in 2040, this is Corridor 6. And it's community mixed use, so it's designated for large-scale commercial uses. The site is proposing to have over 20,000 square feet of commercial uses, both fronting on 4th Street and 5th Street. There is a grade change between the two elevations. And then Corridor 6 allows for 6 stories in height with requests to exceed 6 stories, evaluated on the basis of whether a taller building is a reasonable means for accomplishing comprehensive plan goals. The applicant has submitted kind of a package of what they're calling community benefits. They are, as this application was deemed complete prior to the end of last year, they are, voluntarily complying with the affordable housing policy with 8% of bedrooms with rents affordable at 60% AMI. They have an affordable commercial space on the ground floor facing 4th Street. They would be voluntarily removing a legal non-conforming drive-through. There are proposed enhanced bus stops, enhanced pedestrian realm, bicycle amenities, including an off-street bicycle path, so bringing the path on 15th up to the sidewalk level and allowing for a transit bump out.
We do have a question from Councilmember Goodman.
I'm sorry. Ms. Silas, they have to apply by the inclusionary zoning.
Not presently. I mean, this application was deemed complete prior to the end of last year.
Okay, so they're doing what everybody else is doing. I mean, what on this is unique? I mean, none of these things look all overly unique for me. They're doing a lot more retail than 1,500 square feet. Do they have a grocery store?
They don't have a grocery store.
So one tiny space is going to be subsidized and the rest of it isn't. I mean, what on this is unique? I mean, none of these things are really unique. How nice they're doing sidewalk and pedestrian realm amenities. That would be like a basic for a building of this size. Are any of these different compared to what you see in other applications?
I think, one of the major things is that this site currently has a legal non-conforming drive-through in the city where we have recently banned drive-throughs. So McDonald's is actually planning to relocate in the building and proposing to relocate in a space that would not have a drive-through, would not have surface parking.
Yay, McDonald's is staying. I mean, like, what about this is like unique comparatively, I guess is what I'm trying to ask. They have some community benefits. All development has community benefits. taking down buildings that are not great and putting up something better is a community benefit in and of itself, but I don't see anything special here that would lend itself to double the FAR. I'm just asking you to tell me.
Yeah, sure. These are more about increasing the height. Staff is still recommending denial of FAR variance. So just kind of guiding you through the thought process of saying that a 10-story building likely would be something that we could support here, probably one that, potentially had a lower FAR. But they are, and I didn't spend too much time on the site plan, but they are proposing to reorient the bus shelters to make those, have latent heat. They're proposing a curb level protected bikeway along 15th. There are a lot of moving pieces with this site because Metro Transit is proposing the BRT along 4th in 2023, and Hennepin County is proposing a protected bikeway along 4th in 2022. So we have had multiple conversations with those entities to talk about kind of how the site design will lend itself to, improved transportation access here. They are proposing some car sharing, and I know they've prepared a presentation about all the sustainability strategies that they're incorporating into the building, so I'll leave that to them to discuss.
Thanks, and also let the record reflect that we've been joined by the council president.
So, given that, I think that staff would be supportive of a building that reaches 10 stories in height here, and part of the major concern about the design of this building initially had to do with the exterior design and the way that that central courtyard led to a building that even looked bulkier than what the FAR would lend itself to. So staff does feel that the revised design is a step in the right direction. However, the proposed floor area ratio of 6.04 is still significantly higher than the 3.78 that would be allowed. And as we're kind of having conversations about what FARs would be allowable in different districts, it is looking, like corridor 6 is well below that 6.0. So the loading variance has been returned to the applicant with the revised diagram. Staff's recommending approval of the applications that were approved at Planning Commission with denial of the variance to increase the floor area ratio and site plan review. So I will stand for questions.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any questions. Thank you. Let's see, are there any other, just one final check? Okay. At this point, I'll open the hearing. I'll first give the appellant on item number 3 the opportunity to speak to the committee. Would Ms. Pearson or representative like to speak?
Good morning, committee members. Just take a moment to bring up the presentation.
And just to maybe explain why we're doing it this way, we want to make sure that the applicant would have an opportunity to not just speak to those items, but to everything in that appeal as well when we're doing this.
Thank you, Chair. And may I ask for some technical assistance? How do I advance? Do I need to?
Our tech whiz is on the way.
Thank you. Do I have to stand over there? Okay, thank you. Council members, my name is Cordelia Pearson. I live at 512 7th Street Southeast, and it's a joy to be here. I don't know how often you hear that at planning and zoning and planning committee hearings, but I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you about this project and about the vision for our community to grow with character. Historic preservation is about managing change, not stopping change. We welcome growth. We welcome investment in this area. We want to make sure that it's building on the resources that we have. 30 years ago, I chose to live in Dinkytown, and what did I hear from my fellow law students? Why did you choose to live there? I chose to live there because we could live there with no car. We didn't have kids or pets at the time, but it was really easy for me to get back and forth to the U, to law school, and to buy food nearby, and really enjoy a healthy life and be a student. So I relate a lot. Now I have a son who's since graduated from the U. So I've been both an alum and a parent and continued to live in this community. So Why have we chosen to live there? Because the character and its location are so vital and vibrant, and it's a community that is always changing and a stronger community for that. In 2013 and 14, I was the chair of the Marcy Homes Neighborhood Association. I had the honor to be serving in that way, and many of my remarks are grounded in the extensive community engagement that occurred then. I've continued on the board until the end of December 2019. So I want to start with, what is Marcy Homes? What is our identity? The character of Dinkytown has a great relationship to the character of Marcy Homes. Then I'll highlight why place matters in your decision, why people matter, how people can figure into your decision, and encourage you to uphold the FER denial, deny the CUP on height, and deny the parking variance. So where is Marcy Homes? We are just across the river from downtown, bordered by the University of Minnesota and the Mississippi River. Within Marcy Homes, you'll see that green box. That green box is the core of Dinkytown. And Dinkytown lies within Marcy Homes. That little heart that you'll see on repeated presentations, that's the intersection at 14th and 4th that is considered the core of Dinkytown. And the orange outline is the project site. So our identity is a historic neighborhood, and in part not just from Dinkytown, but also from the surrounding. There's a Greek historic area, and the University of Minnesota, the historic knoll, is adjacent to Dinkytown as well. Why is this streetcar hub different from others? You have many streetcar hubs throughout Minneapolis. Why protect this one? This streetcar hub also is the commercial node that's closest to the University of Minnesota, and as the City Council decided in 2015, merited historic protections. So you'll see once again, the green is the core of Dinkytown, the larger red box is Dinkytown expanded, and then the project is outlined in orange. Okay, so just to refresh, what are some of the buildings that support those small businesses and character of Dinkytown? You'll see many of them here, from 1 to 2.5 stories in height. Many of them commercial, many of them mixed use, so there's residential above commercial. So the district character was recognized actually before Marcy Homes launched its master plan process, and the city decided to have a separate and connected Dinkytown Business District commercial plan in addition to the Marcy Homes small area plan. The city identified at least 21 buildings that were contributing to this unique character. They also did a market study. What is it that's different about the area? There's a unique nostalgia-related brand. In fact, to the degree that as you just invested in Meet Minneapolis and in enhancing the neighborhood character on the Meet Minneapolis site, Dinkytown is one of those highlighted sites. Character and class were the words used on the Meet Minneapolis site. This plan also recognized there are strong development pressures on this area, and how could the city maintain the unique character of this area while embracing growth? The older character, particularly in the core, could become an increasingly differentiator once this was before LRT went through. So the core commercial area, the recommendation is to maintain that and expand the commercial area. You'll see that larger red and pink area, and the hashed area was the potential historic buildings at the time. I want to distinguish the business district from the historic district. The city did act in 2015. On the left is the diagram of the historic district. This site is adjacent to but not within the historic district. However, the city did adopt business district guidelines, including height maximum. The infill is anticipated, welcomed, according to those guidelines, to protect the commercial viability of the small businesses in the area. So I have these two maps side by side so you can see how the project relates to the historic district. So what was in that small area plan adopted by the city? The overall purpose is to support the economic vitality and vibrancy, maintain the unique character of this. The guidelines for infill were clearly spelled out. In the core, intensive development is not consistent. There are no buildings there now, today, in 2020. There are no buildings that are more than 6 stories tall. New development is welcome and should respond to and contribute to this unique character. And I reiterate, 6 stories was listed specifically as a maximum. So that's a little bit about the background. Let's talk briefly about the project. orienting you to the site. As you approach Dinkytown from the stadium, on your left is Sydney Hall. That is 6 stories tall. Straight ahead of you on the left, the Qdoba, and then you can see Annie's in the back. You can see the downtown skyline on the left. The McDonald's before you. What you see in the background is the chateau that is outside of the core area. And you see the proposal site where the arrow is. Notably, the signature view for Dinkytown, the Dinkytown USA logo below, is that exact same view, featuring the lower scale development in Dinkytown. If you stand in the core and look towards the east, once again, the arrow designates where the building would be. You've got Goldie Gopher Sports on the left, Qdoba and restaurants, and the Loring bar and restaurant on the right. All of these are 2.5 at most stories. So and once again, this is the site looking a little bit more towards the site where McDonald's is. 2.5 and 1-story buildings. If you stand on University, the other gateway to Dinkytown, you can see Annie's there, also where the McDonald's is. The development of this site will affect all these view sheds near the university as well. So in the 2040 plan, the city looks specifically, you'll see on the right the smaller diagram with the recommended expanded commercial area. The city in the 2040 plan adopted that, said, yes, we agree, we should expand the commercial area. Within this, the green bordered core, lower density in corridor 6, outside of that area, especially up on 15th Avenue, that's transit 15. So they expand the area and it's consistent with a small area plan. Looking at the built form, the same thing. Corridor 6, transit 15 is adjacent. Some things I want to highlight for you is the boundary is clear between the 5th Street is the boundary between that corridor 6 and higher density development outside. Infill is invited, and the 6-story guideline is there to protect the character and the economic strength of Dinkytown. So this small area plan, if you go to the 2040 website, is specifically integrated into the 2040 plan, together with its height guidelines. So shifting to this project, the applicant bears the burden of proof to show that they've met the criteria for a CUP and a parking variance. This site is developable at 6 stories. In fact, it would not need a parking variance if it were a 6-story building at the same density. 10 stories would be injurious to the Dinkytown district. That's one of the criteria. Is this project injurious to the surrounding properties? As staff cited in its FAR denial, this project may alter the essential character of the locality. And when the character of the locality is central to its economic vitality, that seems to be inconsistent with the 2040 plan. The CUP and variance are driven solely by economic considerations, not the economic considerations of the community and the small businesses that thrive there, but the economic considerations of one party, the developer. Secondly, access is dangerous and inadequate. I've highlighted here the site. This is overlaid on the city's 15th Avenue bike improvements that have just been put in. I am a year-round cyclist, and people have died at this intersection. This proposal, this visual from what's now been put in, has wisely separated the bikes from the buses so that bikes can go straight through and buses make the right turn and cars make a right turn. It's a separated bike facility. What the proposal includes is putting the bikes up on a high level between the buses and the pedestrians so that people getting on and off a bus have to cross a bike lane. That seems like a less safe alternative. And additionally, on 4th Street, the access to the project is by the alley to the west of the site at the top of this diagram, so that people who are getting on and off of BRT, people biking in what's proposed to be a separated bike facility on 4th Street, would be crossed by people going into the alley and trucks for the commercial uses there as well. So those two features by themselves suggest that this access is dangerous. That is also one of the CUP criteria. Is this a safe project? This is a heavily used area as economic vitality depends on people walking, biking, and using transit. We should be making this safer for people walking, not more dangerous. This is not consistent with the 2040 plan. The 2040 plan specifically states on the small area plan attempts to emulate the densities in Dinkytown Business District plan. In Corridor 6, building heights should be 2 to 6 stories. Higher buildings are not a reasonable means to achieve 2040 goals. It conflicts with the business district plan. Note, we're only talking about 4 blocks. 4 square blocks, and part of that is owned by the university, so it's not even a full 4 square blocks. So if you look at the citywide goals for increasing density, this is a very small area to increase from 2.5 stories to 6. We don't need to go to 10 to meet citywide goals for affordable housing and densification. Specifically, new development should both respond and contribute to the unique character of Dinkytown, not diminish it. So that's about the place in the 2040 plan. Let's talk a little about the people. There was extensive community engagement at several phases for Dinkytown. Both in developing the small area plan, there was innovative outreach that engaged students and people of all walks of life. The 2040 plan, you're very familiar with, extensive community input. There are 40 small area plans like this that were analyzed with respect to the 2040 plan. This small area plan was specifically referenced as informing the 2040 plan and its density recommendations. And then finally, in project review, this project went from 25 stories to 10. We were initially told when it was 25 that they couldn't possibly reduce it to 10. And I would challenge them to reduce it to 6 so that it actually contributes to growing with character, not diminishes the character of the area. This is a key stage for you as a city council to build confidence in the 2040 plan implementation. This is a great opportunity to follow the 2040 plan's guidelines on built form. Corridor 6. Yes, you have the opportunity on a case-by-case basis to decide more density is needed, but where a small area plan is explicit about keeping the height at 6 stories to retain economic vitality, people will be expecting the city council to lead on protecting that growing with character at the local level. So following those small area plans, if I was part of a small area plan elsewhere in the city, I would be looking at your actions today to determine how those small area plans are going to be evaluated. I'd love you to send the signal. You participated, you count. We listened. We set boundaries. And in this day and age, boundaries are extremely important. Those boundaries make a difference. Boundaries matter. The signal you will send is we will require developers to honor those boundaries. On the private sector investment side, you set out a transformative 2040 plan to build developer confidence, to welcome investment that honors plans, that builds character in our communities, and to reduce reliance on variances. You defined the boundaries you said. You don't have to guess is the signal you want to send to developers. We welcome development that follows the rules, that saves everyone time and money with fewer variances. So I encourage you to uphold the FAR denial. I think staff's reasoning on that was sound. On the same grounds, deny the CUP for height. If you decide to grant the CUP, you send a signal to developers that it's okay to depart from the small area plans in the 2040 plan. And then denying the parking variance follows. If this project were a 6-story building, the parking would be adequate for 6 stories. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Once again, it's a joy to see development come to Dinkytown and to have the opportunity to speak to you today. And I want to thank community members on Marcy Homes Neighborhood Association for supporting this appeal.
Thank you, Ms. Pearson. Just seeing if there's questions. Otherwise, I've got a couple. You talked a little bit about how a 10-story building would be injurious to the neighborhood. If you could kind of elaborate more, I mean, the point really was if things are going to go higher, there had to be a very clear community benefit. So I want to take this opportunity to ask around affordable housing, around environmental standards, from going from 6 to 10, what more would need to be done, or what is wrong with the current plans as it is?
Chair Schroeder, thank you for asking that question. As Councilmember Goodman pointed out, the benefits that are listed here would be standard for a major development. There's nothing that would contribute. When Marcy Homes commented at the December Planning Commission, Marcy Homes listed some very specific community benefits: a grocery store for affordable food for students, a greater intensity of affordable housing and commercial space. There was no landscaping plan with us, and if we are going to build our city to prepare for to address the climate crisis, we need to do a better job of looking at that integrated building solutions. So 10 stories, grocery store, If this isn't the right site for a grocery store, fine. Stay with 6 stories. So 10 stories, those were, and I should have people from the neighborhood association as well, who are representing them per se today, address that specifically. But from the public engagement through this, loud and clear. We had more people show up at public meetings for this project than many, many other projects, and specifically saying, where's the affordable housing in this project? Where are the grocery stores?
Thank you. All right, not seeing any other questions. Wait, oh, I'm sorry. Councilmember Goodman?
I'm just wondering, so I was involved actively in the 2040 plan, and I don't recall us saying that Corridor 6 was 6 stories or Corridor 10 was 10 stories. That was like the baseline, and that you could go higher if you met certain criteria. So I'm a little bit confused that there seems to be this assertion that 6 means 6, and you better have a darn good reason that you can identify to us to go higher. I don't actually think that's true. I have lots of neighborhoods in my ward that have small area plans that have been incorporated into 2040, and we view the small area plan information as guidance. And so I'm just wondering if you could tell me how you see Corridor 6 or Corridor 10 as an example, meaning that's how tall it can be, and it can't be any taller than that. Perhaps just simply adding housing to the city's housing stock is enough to go from 6 to 10. Now, you can hear, I don't need to hear all the testimony. I think the FAR situation is ridiculous. So I'm not sure they can get to 10 without that FAR. I guess I'll find out from them how they plan to do that. But I'm not as bothered by the height. I'm bothered by the idea that there's an assertion that city council members said 6 means 6 and 10 means 10, because I don't think it does. And I have Corridor 6 and Corridor 10 in my ward, and in my ward, a developer would never consider saying, I want to build 20 stories in a 6.
Chair Schroeder, Councilmember Goodman, thank you so much for raising this. I agree with you. So Corridor 6, as it's described in built form, says from 2 to 6 stories. And then there's really specific language that says, and if it does meets citywide goals, according to the 2040 plan, we would consider higher. I agree with that. That makes perfect sense. In this particular case, the very specific planning for this economic area, the city paid for a market study and economic analysis for the vitality for Dinkytown. That study resulted in a very specific recommendation of we want infill, we invite development. In fact, there's been a lot of development since then. The venue, the Marshall, Sydney came before that, but they're all 6 stories. So to maintain the economic vibrancy, and part of it has to do with what the space, the commercial space is. So many people talk about naturally occurring affordable housing. There's also naturally occurring affordable commercial space. We have that in Dinkytown. Let's not throw it away. We can build on it by having a development nearby be 6 stories. So I agree with you that Corridor 6 does have that permissive language of if there are bigger goals, bigger benefits, as you mentioned before, by all means. But I ask you, in the case of Dinkytown, where there has been specific drill down and analysis supported and paid for by the city, to be very circumspect of increasing from 6, where 6 was defined as a level that would sustain both the economy and the character of this very unique historic district and commercial area.
Mr. Chair, I just am then curious about this. So you think like 6 stories would maintain economic vibrancy and more people won't? I mean, I kind of would make the argument that you'd have more economic vibrancy if there were more people. I mean, we're facing in Elliott Park, we can't get a grocery store. We have the same fight. We really want a grocery store. There's a lot of people. I would say building more would attract a grocer, not building less. Are you suggesting that they could build the same number of apartments but only go to 6 stories? Or it's really just is it really just the height you're opposed to? Or is it the FAR, the bulk? Or is it the number of people? Because more people would actually make for better economic vibrancy, I think.
This is, Chair Schroeder, Councilmember Goodman, this is a great example of where boundaries matter, boundaries count. You've defined a commercial core where the vibrancy and the investment is commercial and residential. If they were to go across the street into Transit 15, they could put a 15-plus story building in. They have chosen to go into an area that was designated where you signaled to developers that this was Corridor 6, not higher, where the business district plan says infill we welcome, up to 6 stories. So to go against that, I'm not going to stand here and say I've done renewed economic analyses, but I will say the city expanded the commercial area. We welcome development. There are many developers. In fact, we just had a land use meeting on Tuesday night where people were asking for the neighborhood to support increased density. And that still goes to the board, hasn't been voted on yet. But the sense of the group was, yes, we need more density. Okay? But if we don't protect a particular core with that economic small businesses, the naturally affordable commercial spaces, we won't have that vibrancy and the distinctive character. We want more community benefits. Bring us the grocery store, bring us affordable housing, and look at areas outside of that 4 square block area. There are plenty of opportunities to develop in Marcy homes. Don't limit your creativity by that.
Okay. Thank you. Not seeing any other, sorry, Council President.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here. And I don't want to get into too much of a back and forth or debate, but I do want to say we are in a clear transition time related to the 2040 plan, and the rules have not been written or defined. So I do think it's important not to make declarative statements about how a development is or isn't meeting rules that have not been written. And staff are working on those rules along with Councilmember Reich and Schrader and Gordon, meeting as a steering committee to write those rules. I think there's some question about how specific or open those rules should be. I err on the side of more specific so that we avoid these project by project debates that I think Minneapolis 2040 was intended to resolve, because we had thousands and thousands of people across the city engaging in the high level goals of 2040. So I think we need to take that same care and apply those same high level goals and principles to resolving these questions about when do we look for more height. So I just want to note now before we get to hear everyone else speak that we're clearly in a transition period where we have not updated the zoning code. And I think we all need to be careful about being clear that that's where we are in this process of adopting all of the legal policies that will come forward in the future.
Yep. Councilmember Gordon.
I can also appreciate how we are in this transition period, but I just think for technical reasons we should clarify what rules we are actually supposed to be paying attention to. This project came in, and it came in under the previous comprehensive plan, and the staff report is written referring to that. Is that correct? If I may ask the staff.
Here we go. So this is a pretty unique application in that it came in December and was originally evaluated under the Minneapolis Plan for Sustainable Growth. Upon appeal, it's being evaluated under Minneapolis 2040. So statute essentially requires that we evaluate an application based on the policies that are in place at the time that it's being considered. So the staff report was intended to address some of the 2040 policies in anticipation of a potential appeal. Also, we have the rezoning on this agenda, and we knew the rezoning was coming in under 2040, but was evaluated by Planning Commission under the Minneapolis Plan for Sustainable Growth. So it's a pretty unique situation that we find ourselves in, but the decisions being made today for consistency with the comp plan should be made considering consistency with Minneapolis 2040.
That certainly puts us in a very challenging situation since we have not outlined what 2040 actually means to allow a conditional use permit for height. So it's impossible for me to make that judgment because we have something that relates to if it backs up city goals of the comp plan, we can make exceptions, and we haven't defined what that actually means. And in the staff report, what we're looking at is the goals of the comprehensive plan for sustainable growth, because it was being evaluated for the conditional use permit of height based on those. So that puts us in a uniquely challenging position, and I would say not necessarily very wise since we haven't even set the policy yet, although we called it out. So we're all on our own to say whether or not we think it meets enough of the comprehensive plan 2040 goals to allow a conditional use for increasing the height where we haven't necessarily defined that, and nobody has even looked at each goal and analyzed it which is typically done by staff for us in the staff report, whereas it was done based on the 2020 comprehensive plan goals. So, but which we should now ignore, I guess.
So there are portions of the staff report that did analyze both 2040 and the Minneapolis Plan for Sustainable Growth. So under the rezoning section, but it was very high level, again, not knowing where we were going to find ourselves. So just evaluating really the built form districts and the land use here. So yes, we do find ourselves in a somewhat awkward position. Per state statute, we have 9 months to bring our zoning code up to a point where we're eliminating any overt conflicts between the code and the comp plan. That work is being done, but it's going to take some time. We're working again with the committee to try to get a sense of what these height increases are going to look like and what the process might be. But this will likely not be the only application that we're going to be considering for height increases before the zoning code is updated.
I can appreciate it, and I'm not necessarily trying to blame us for not getting our work done, or particularly not trying to blame planning department staff for us being in this predicament, even though I'm expressing some frustration about it. And I actually think falling back on some of the goals from 2020 and looking at what that says is helpful, because quite honestly, many of them are reflected in 2040 as well and are connected. But still, this does make it challenging, and I can recognize how we want to be sensitive for setting precedent with 2040 as well, and even more so. But I'll be trying to look at both comp plans, I guess, as I'm analyzing it.
Thank you. Not seeing any other questions. Thank you for your patience as we had time.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your consideration.
I will now give the applicant the opportunity to address the committee. Is Ms. Sadoway or anyone here, representative here to speak?
Yes. Council members, Neil Reardon, ESG Architecture and Design. I'll also be joined by my colleague Alyssa. Thank you all. I'd particularly like to thank everyone who's been a part of this process over the last almost a year in navigating through the various things that were just discussed. So thank you to staff, everyone at the city, and thank you to the neighborhood and all the other stakeholders who have helped us, shape this project and take it to where it is today. At the December 9th hearing, we heard the Planners and Commission's comments. We've since revised the project in we believe some meaningful ways. Those have already been outlined for you today. But mainly the two are, we heard that the massing of the building should be reduced on the FAR denial. We've revised that approach, and I'll show you a little bit more about that here in a minute. Secondarily, we were asked how the project addresses the climate crisis, and we've put a greater focus on that, on the sustainability features, had some time to really outline that, so we're going to do that succinctly for you here shortly. What I'm showing you here first is a bird's eye of the previous project. As noted, it was a large donut in floor plan, and you can see the bird's eye view of it there in the site context. As I already noted, many of the buildings in the area have been built in the last 10 or 15 years are 6-story buildings. To the north, along 15th Avenue, as already noted, that is in the 2040 comp plan a T15 designated district. And then additionally, there's pieces and parts of neighborhoods here like the Chateau that do pop up and are 18 stories. So wanted to put this in perspective in terms of the context with that image. I just flipped forward to the new design, the revisions that we've made in the massing to the building. You can see there how we've revised that to really have two courtyards that face southeast and northwest, respectively, and reduced some bulk in other areas. What this had done is really concentrated the bulk into the lower levels and into the middle of the parcel, or middle of the site. There in red, you can kind of see those outlined on the screen. Just to I think everybody's oriented already. This site includes the half block here. It includes 4 parcels, some of which are designated C1 under current zoning and some of which are designated C2 under current zoning. some existing photos of the heavy surface parking and drive-through, which has already been noted. I think most people are very familiar with this site, so I'll go through these close. Lastly, I did want to note, so in terms of the existing site, there are 3 curb cuts. You can see those in that photo. All 3 of these curb cuts would go away as a part of this project. And really how we're achieving that is with a through block shared alleyway. It would serve the other properties on the block as well as ours. And this reduces all the curb cuts and also takes all the loading and other functions that could and shouldn't happen on all 3 streets and puts them into the internal part of the site. And additionally, I'll outline some of the what I feel are strong benefits to the improved site plan. So there on the right, I'll just notice there's an enlarged proposed public plaza here at the corner. So this is that chamfered edge that exists at the bridge at 4th Street and 15th Avenue. And that improved experience there, we really think is a valuable thing to this project. That is a kind of a barren, just concrete slab right now with one bus stop that actually serves 2 very busy bus lines, and we've since reorganized those bus stations as a part of this work as well. Additionally, on the left-hand side there is the overall site plan. You can see with the alley proceeding from as a one-way, proceeding from 4th Street to 5th Street, and it's really a one-way because we wanted to minimize those curb cuts and reduce the pedestrian conflicts at both 4th and 5th as much as possible. What we do here is widen the boulevard, as already mentioned, and one of the reasons we do that is to really separate the bicycle traffic and enhance the safety of it by taking it off the street, allowing for the buses to maneuver in the street without conflict with the bicycles. And then we offer ample boulevard space here along all 3 streets for all the functions that need to take place, be those bicycle, pedestrian, bus loading, or other. Additionally, the project has some promenades which deal with the grade change that allow us access to our main residential entry as well
Thank
as
you.
all
I've got
the
a
commercial
question
spaces.
from Councilmember Goodman.
Yes, go ahead.
I don't want to bring up another issue. I'm just interested in the alley. Is it a public alley now?
It is not a public alley right now. Right now, there's an easement on part of it, and we are exploring an additional easement as part of the new plan. So it would involve 2 easements. It's not a public alley right now, and it's actually not a through alley at all right now. It just is accessed from both sides, and then it dead ends on each. So this would be a significant improvement for loading for the other adjacent parcels.
That's what I was going to ask you about. So how does that affect the properties on the other side of the streets? I mean, so they've been living, their businesses have been living next to something that's been less dense and less chaotic. Mm-hmm. But is this an improvement for them? I'm sure they'll speak to that, but do they view this as an improvement for their own loading and unloading, or do they view it as a gigantic tower overshadowing them? And I'm sure they'll ask us that, but tell us that. But I'm just wondering how you view that alley situation. That's a major change for all those property owners on the other side. What have you done to make it better for them?
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman. A great point that has not been brought up in much of the previous of the public hearing or the stakeholder meetings throughout. And so I'm glad to clearly articulate that. We feel that it's a massive improvement. We need it for our project in order to get rid of those other curb cuts and make those enhancements. So the very fact that we're sharing it is an enhancement for us. I won't speak for them, but I believe it's an enhancement for them in that they're not going to have to back out and do a turnaround with each of the dead end situations that they currently have. This cleans up. It clearly delineates where the vehicles should go and when they're going to go.
And I can address that as we have addressed the other property owners, and having that through access right now, because it kind of dead ends there and there's trash cans and there's actually a lot of vagrant activity there that they do not like. So having the activity along there, getting it off the street, because all their deliveries are coming on the street right now. So to be able to have that corridor for it, everyone's very excited about that opportunity.
And don't have to answer this now if it's later, but I am interested in the kind of the differences in the loading from the previous, if there are any.
Sure. That's a fairly quick summary. Councilmember Schrader. So the difference is before we were one shy on the internal loading spaces within the building. We had 2. We've since increased that to 4. Additionally, but not with respect to the loading requirement, we have some ancillary loading space in a widened zone along the alley, and that's really there to supplement what's happening on the inside of the building. So those are the changes since Planning Commission on December 9th. I'll just outline quick. We have one sub-level of parking here at the B2 level, and then additionally at the B1 level, which is the level of the building that faces Fifth Street being one level lower. There is fully enclosed parking with commercial spaces there in blue, and then the commercial space along Fifth that fronts the street. So 1 2/3 levels of parking. This is the level 1 plan. You can start to see the 2 courtyards there, as well as the site plan overlaid. This is a typical floor showing here with the double courtyards, and then an upper floor here where it steps back at those to create those larger courtyards. Additionally, the roof plan showing how we've maximized the solar potential of the roof, and we'll allude to that in the sustainable strategies shortly.
Thank you for having us today. I'm going to speak to some of the design elements as we walk around the building. So we're going to start here at 4th Street and 15th Avenue, and you can see that the building, the taller portions of the building are really stepped back from the street, so we can continue the 2-story expression of historic Dinkytown and those commercial spaces all along 4th Street, and also bringing the warmth of the brick facades, the warmth and the timelessness of that material along 4th Street, while still having a very welcoming corner that's not overwhelming. We have a nice plaza that's going to be a place for people to gather, have spontaneous meetings, a place to step back off the bus, off the bike trail, and enjoy some of those commercial offerings on 4th Street. Real quick, too, you can also start to see where we've carved away the mass to accentuate and highlight the 6-story portions where the building steps back and relieves into those courtyards and along 4th Street. Here is 5th Street and 15th Avenue. So here we both respond to the 2-story expression of Dinkytown as well as the taller buildings to the north. So it's a 3-story and 2-story brick volume, lots of storefront glazing, lots of commercial activity, metal canopies, a lot of pedestrian elements here. This would be the view from Target, if you're standing at Target on 5th and 14th Avenue. So again, here you see where we've strategically carved away the mass, pulled it in from the building, accentuating the corners so that this project has its place in the community as well as honoring what's there already. And here the view from 4th Street and 14th Avenue. So this would be the Goldie's commercial storefront. And you can see how the project's 4th Street facade really continues that character of the 2-story Dinkytown, the warmth of those textures and materials along 4th Street. And then the taller portions of the building, accentuating the 6 stories, but then providing a backdrop, so the taller portions becoming more of a backdrop to the Dinkytown area. So again, back to the approach on 4th Street and 15th, and really looking at how this prominent corner and plaza defines the project's place in the community and its role to serving students at the University of Minnesota. While still having the warmth, the character, bringing these textures of materials and scale in the places where it matters along the street and the public promenades.
So just in summary, that kind of concludes. I think we've covered how we've reduced the bulk here, shifting down to 6 stories. So we think that there's a visible reduction in the massing here by concentrating more of it. It is the same square footage. It is the same FAR, and we feel like that this is the project that's feasible to bring. So to move to the next section, as we've already noted.
Question from Councilmember Gordon.
For sure.
I'm just curious about what the practical difficulty is that would seems to require you to increase the floor area ratio as dramatically as you have.
Sure. I'll let the developer, Ryan, address that.
Yeah, it really comes down to the economics of the project and the economic viability of the project.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Goodman.
But while you're up there,
Okay.
I'm wondering if what you're showing us is something with the 6.4 FAR, and we, like the Planning Commission and staff did, reject that, then couldn't you reduce the height to 6 stories?
Reduce it to 6 stories.
You're showing us a plan that has the FAR at what you'd like, which is 6.04, correct?
Correct.
And that's already been rejected by staff and the Planning Commission, correct?
Correct, on the basis that it was the bulk of the building that was an impediment.
But it's been rejected. And you're appealing it to us to say don't reject it, right?
Correct, but
And if
it's the implied FAR, not the visual FAR is what we're...
FAR to me is FAR, so I'm just going to be clear. So if we don't approve the FAR, then what happens?
Then the project goes away.
Oh, okay.
So ultimately, we're talking about FAR as density, and we need that density. We need those people in this building to make this project work, and that's how we're doing it. I know we talked about before about a 25-story coming down, which was some guidance that we had early on.
You shouldn't have even suggested a 25-story building here, so I'm not going to give you credit from going from 25 to 10. I just want to know that you've already had the staff and the Planning Commission say the FAR is inappropriate. And what you're telling me, well, you told Councilmember Gordon that this was purely economic, you had no practical difficulty, and you're telling me if you don't get it approved, then there is no project.
Correct.
So you're asking us basically take this one or nothing. That's a pretty easy decision for me. It might not be for everyone else, but I just want to understand where you're coming from. If this is purely an economic thing, then because it sounds like it is, let's just be honest about that.
Absolutely. And as a responsible developer, I wouldn't be responsible to give you a project that's not viable, to come here and get something approved that really just can't ever be built and waste everyone's time. So it's my responsibility to show a project that we can actually do. And I think that's important to know.
It'd be good if you could show one you could actually do with the current FAR, but you're suggesting you can't do it with the current FAR. So the price is too high for the land, you've spent too much on the entitlements, whatever it is. I mean, that's just the reality.
And those are the realities of it, correct.
Okay, thanks.
So,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I had similar questions, perhaps intended to be phrased differently. I did want to note that the design has changed significantly since the Planning Commission saw it. And I think it's too bad because I think that project that we see today was going in a direction that the Planning Commission probably would have been a lot more amenable to and perhaps would have been able to work with you and staff to get to a project that could have been approved, right? And so I was also interested in, and I think you've already answered this question, but with the staff recommendation of denying the FAR variance, I mean, that carries pretty significant weight, I think, with policymakers. And so for us to be able to disagree with the decision of staff, the recommendation of staff, we would have to hear really compelling reasons to approve that FAR. I'm interested in this in a policy sense too, because we don't have a lot of 10-story buildings approved or proposed, in part because our policy guidance has been so all over the place that developers didn't know if they should build a 25-story building or a 6-story building. And I mean, this is not just the only example of places where developers weren't sure if they should propose a point tower or a 6-story stick building. So again, I think 2040 is going to help us get to a better sense of predictability in our housing market as we go forward and continue to refine the policies and further develop them. But I don't think we want a bulky 6-story building any more than we want a bulky 10-story building. And so in some ways, FAR is a measure of the total volume of a building. then we have other, and this is maybe what you're talking about with the perceived FAR, which is like, how does it feel when you're walking along it on the street? And again, I think this building that you showed us today versus the one that went to Planning Commission feels very different to a person walking along the street with the way that the bulk has been broken up. So maybe there's some comments, but I guess my underlying question was the same, which is why bring us a building that has the same FAR that staff has recommended denying?
Yeah, Council President Bender, I'll just address that briefly with a few things. The project, as we've evaluated it in the last almost year, has always included around the same amount of square footage, as well as a target of 325 to 360 units. So yeah, that includes a 25-story tower. Additionally, I'll note that previously, this site, I studied it at 6 stories a lot, and there was never a rendition of that was feasible to a client, to this client. So I'll just note those two things.
And I think I'll add the difference that we haven't seen, and we're short-circuiting a little bit of this, is our sustainability approach. And I think that's going to be something that we haven't seen, and that's why we're justifying this FAR. And so if you'll just give us the time to address that, we have a very robust approach. Our head of global sustainability is here to kind of run through that with us real quick. So if you'll...
Sure, I do have one point on that, though. I mean, your point about the having the same, floor, like same ratio of like how it looks. I think there's been a lot more thought from what we initially saw in Planning Commission to get to here, and I just want to make sure that you get that point clearly. Like I really appreciate all the thoughtfulness, and that comes out in this. But we would have had a different conversation having started with this. Is I think the point we're trying to make.
Yeah, hindsight, we would have loved to too. So if we could get started with the sustainability, well, we're running into that right now. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, members of the council. We have many projects in our firm, like you can imagine. But when I heard that your municipality is concerned about the climate crisis, that made this project for me a priority, and I wanted to be directly involved in this project. Because having worked in different countries, when I find a municipality that is so invested in sustainability, that is where I have the opportunity to have the most impact. That synergy, that dialogue with the municipality allows us to promote meaningful, sustainable development. So I'm glad that this conversation is happening and at this level. Through this project, and I'm not talking FAR, I'm talking about sustainability. Through this project, if you decide to approve this project, you and your community will become an active player in the fight against climate change. I just want to make that clear. And at the same time, you will be able to improve the living standards of thousands of people. This project will help your community to thrive and build a more sustainable future. But let me tell you, from a sustainability standpoint, what we are addressing and the type of impact that we are trying to make. And when we talk about sustainability, I want to make sure that we talk about environmental aspects, but also social aspects. So, from an environmental standpoint, we are increasing the standards of this building to the equivalent of a LEED silver, if not possibly gold, certification. We are addressing more heavily stormwater management, water efficiency, saving gallons of water, the equivalent of an Olympic-sized pool for 4.5 months, indoor environmental quality, energy efficiency. We are talking about LED fixtures, we are talking about sensors, and so on and so forth. On top of this, we are going to provide share vehicles program for the residents. We are providing preferred parking for green vehicles and electric vehicle charging stations. Besides the improved, in my view, bike configuration. All these measures will increase the current walkability, transit, and biker score of the community, okay? We are adding solar panels to the roof. We have maximized the area of the roof to include a solar photovoltaic system that will be able to offset 57% of energy consumption of the building, and so it will be renewable energy. And this will also allow a reduction in the energy bills of the residents and the retail tenants. This will also, of course, have an impact on greenhouse gas emissions, which will be dramatically reduced. Okay?
Quick question on that.
Yeah.
When you talk about the emissions, is that just in the operations of the building, or are you looking to reduce emissions in the building materials or the way you're building the material yourself?
Yes. We are proposing a holistic approach. The solar panels address the energy consumption, and we will go through another certification that we will be pursuing. We are talking about other interventions.
Councilmember Gordon has a question.
Are you still going to be using natural gas to heat the building? Or what's the heat source for the building?
My understanding is it would be very little, the natural gas, right?
Right. As far as our MEP and how we're looking at it, as far as we're looking at our mechanical systems, for the LEED certification, it'll be the efficiency. So we would look at that as a holistic approach to the building as a whole.
Well, so there'll be
There'll be natural gas.
It'll be natural gas. Is there any geothermal that you'll be using at all?
We haven't explored that.
Okay.
This project is a very early stages. So to do those analysis, to do the energy modeling, which we will do, we'll find out the best systems to use that are more readily available in the community.
So we are also we will be providing recycling and composting programs, robust programs. But on top of that, we are partnering with an organization that will bring high social impact. How? This organization collects waste food from the residents and will turn into composting for local consumption. So landscaping, agriculture, farmers, they can all have the composting coming from the building operations and waste. From the retails, this organization collects unused food that will go into the landfill to feed the homeless and to feed other disadvantaged segments of the population. So another big social impact there. We are starting from a 60% waste diversion rate from the landfill as a starting point. And on top of this, we are also adding an energy management system software. We have signed an agreement. We have acquired a software from Measurable. Measurable is a company, international company, that provides state-of-the-art software for utility management and performance of the building and sustainability reporting. So with full transparency as well, anytime you want to know about the environmental impact of the building, we will be able to report to you instantly the metrics that you care about. Water consumption, electricity, gas reductions, greenhouse gas emission reductions. And every year we will set, this will be as part of, is part of our corporate strategy. Every year we set targets that we work toward reducing. Finally, we will be building according to a WELL certification standard. WELL certification is a global certification standard. It's like LEED, but it also address health and the well-being of the residents. And the reason why we want to do this is because we want to allow the students that come to live in our building to focus on what they are coming for, which is studying. And it's very common in our building that our building is preferred to university's library for students to study because we build to those standards. So apart from this, I just wanted to add one thing, which is I heard about community benefits, and I was brought here to talk about the climate crisis. I'm learning more about your concern about community benefits. I will be more than happy to address that issue as well, and we can do much more there. And every time there is always an opportunity. The question then becomes what is becomes viable, of course, from an economic standpoint. If you want, I would be more than happy to build a paradise, but it has to be a viable paradise. So I don't want the building to, crawl and anything. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
So, and kind of to your point there, that's why we're setting these benchmarks. We don't have a fully designed project. You have to set the parameters and the goals at this stage of the game, and then we'll get into exactly how those will best. So as far as LEED and WELL, those are kind of the programs that we've outlined. So those are the commitments we're willing to make. So at the end of the day, yes, we're asking for this FAR variance, and I'm very sincere, and I have been sincere from the start about the realities of needing the density and needing the FAR, and ultimately that's where we stand. Talking through here just about where we're at with the project, we've worked for over a year now on the community benefits, and those should not be under addressed. We talked about the retail giving it away. That's $1 million hit to the value of the building, so that's not insignificant. So affordable retail is something that we heard very early on, and that we're addressing to bring those small local businesses back into the community and keeping them in the dinky town. So I think that's important. Another misconception is about the grocery store, and which Councilmember Fletcher was here because we talked about this at quite extent, and the issue we ran into is with the liquor license, and the liquor license being a state law of only certain grocery stores, you can have one in the region. So it's not viable for the grocery store to be a 20,000 square foot grocery store. We are, however, still in talks with urban format grocery stores, so that's in the 8,000 to 10,000 square foot range. So we're in very extensive talks with those, but again, we don't have a project yet, so they're not able to commit the time to the resources. But a lot of places, Targets and other ones, are rolling out the smaller format one. But we're more focused on the grocery aspect, not all the other stuff, specifically grocery, and that's what we're targeting there. So there's a lot of innovative stuff. We're talking to Urban Bodega in Phoenix, and they're talking about coming here. So we are really into that. That is not off the table at all. That's completely in play. We've invested a lot of money into strategies and doing our own market studies too, to talk about the viability of a grocery store. So we're giving it to these grocers, showing them the footprint of how this will work. It's really good here. So we have that space carved out, and we do have that as an option. So that's kind of a misnomer that's off the table there. That's significantly a focus of ours, and we have a dedicated retail person on that. Going through that, of course, you've heard about the urban improvement and how the urban improvement is going to completely increase. You heard the sustainability. Each of our residents' carbon footprint is now significantly reduced. Each of these people in this building are going to be significantly reduced. Affordability. We helped pioneer this early on with the framework and helping kind of with the feedback loop about what's viable for student housing. There's been policies passed about multifamily, but the student housing is very different. And so we've helped with the framework of that early on, and it's been a very important piece. But at the end of the day, supply is really a great way to combat this, and almost 1,000 beds is really one of the pieces that will really help do that and add this right at the doorstep, a transit hub right at the doorstep of the university. So I do believe all those things going forward significantly go above and beyond the 2040 plan, and we've done a lot of work to get there. We as a developer are not your typical developer. We've carried through on our promises here in Minneapolis, and we have across the country. We're very sincere about this project and the impacts and the positive impacts it can have across the platform. We know this suburban site is not what we want here right now. And I'm very sorry about the timing. There's 4 different owners, and they all don't like each other, and they all have different plans. Some of them have plans to renovate, and we sure don't want that for another 50 years. So I know this comes at a really bad time as far as 2040 goes, but this is the opportunity we have here and the real opportunity that we have to make some change for that. So today, I ask for your support and approval of this progressive project. I thank you for your time and your attention.
Thank you. Not seeing any other questions, I will now open the hearing to members of the public who would like to address the committee. Please limit your comments to 2 minutes per person, which will be tracked with the timer by the clerk. Would any member of the public like to speak? And if you could say your name and address for the record, please.
Good morning, council members. I'm Eric Wunderlich. I live at 413 5th Street Southeast. I am vice president of the Marcy Homes Neighborhood Association. Been involved with this project all the way through, but my comments are my own. They're not on behalf of the Neighborhood Association. This developer came to us with a 25-story building proposed, said they couldn't consider anything less. They came back later with a 10-story building. They were asked throughout the project about rooftop solar, LEED, these kinds of things, which they rejected out of hand. They came to the neighborhood with a proposal for a building that's going up next to the Southeast Library, now the R. Von Fraser Library. They didn't really recognize it. They thought maybe there was an important building next door to this, but they didn't do their homework. They have no idea who Ralph Rapson is. That aside, part of the Minneapolis plan for development, the previous long-range plan, and the 2040 plan, which I was also very involved in, are tenets that projects would be supported that also address and add to the support existing character areas and historic districts. So projects that would come forward would be also analyzed on how they add to the fabric of the community in these existing recognized areas. Dinkytown is one of a handful of areas in the city that is recognized as for its character, for its history. And honestly, this is about height, whether that's through a rejection of the floor area ratio or the conditional use permit, it kind of is about height and what a 10-story building would do to the character of Dinkytown. I would support a 25-story building 2 blocks north of this site. And again, I'm speaking personally. If this building were proposed a block or 2 outside of the heart of Dinkytown, it would be received very differently. We've supported buildings and density throughout the community. Under the 2040 plan, there is a whole new palette for density across the city. So this would be a mistake to put this here now.
Thank you. Anyone else interested in speaking? I see you.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm David Mosman. I live at 619 8th Street Southeast, and I often use that corner to transfer from buses. I have a master's in public health and have used and thus when I'm standing there, I look to what is safety, what is convenient, what are the hazards. We're talking about raising the height of the building. That building will go from 6 to 10. They're going to justify it by changing the traffic flow of the buses, the bikes, etc. I think those are hazards and not benefits. I think we do need to also consider what we're doing and talking to our young people coming to the college. Our young people come to the college often from suburbia or rural Minnesota. They're used to maybe 2-3 stories built environment. They can walk into Dinkytown and feel at home. They get 10 stories, 20 stories. They find themselves walking into a concrete canyon. They're not going to find comfortable to transition And we are talking this decade in a major transitions in many ways. I love the LEED standards. I love the rooftop solar. I love many of the things that they're putting in there. And I look forward to them coming back with a 6-story building that will make students at the U comfortable coming to and transitioning as they're transitioning out of adolescence into young adulthood. Thank you.
Thank you. Go on up, if you could say your name and address for the record, please.
Yeah, hi. My name is DJ Chawla, and I'm at the India Kitchen next to the Five Guys. Now I've been going there for the last 6 months since we opened the place. We love to stay there, but since I've been working there in that place, actually, there's an alley where they're talking about, in the parking in the back, into the liquor store. Every time I go there or leave, it's a disaster in the back. The alley is so narrow that you cannot even drive inside. You don't know who's coming out from the north side or from the east side or west side. It's very hard to even get out of the parking behind the McDonald's. I'm actually here just to encourage the developer, you guys, to give them to develop this place. It's behind that place. It's a junk. It's ghetto, and every time you go there, people are drinking and trash all over the building. I think the developer are trying to help the city to do something good in that corner. It seems like you guys are giving a hard time not to build the place. They can go somewhere else and build that development and bring communities so together and nice and clean area. This area is one of the best ghetto in the back. You cannot park. Your car can be broken anytime. The trash is all over behind it. All the time, homeless people go in the building, stay overnight. This place needs to be changed, and I believe that these are the guys, the best. They should develop that place. You should give them an opportunity to clean this place. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else interested in speaking? Please come up to the mic and say your name and address for the record.
Chris Meyer, 6016 6th Street Southeast. I've lived in this neighborhood for a decade, and I was really excited to see this project coming forward because of all the benefits that it would bring. The biggest one is getting rid of that drive-through, and that's a very expensive community benefit for us to be able to get, because now that drive-throughs are banned throughout the city, and they had already been banned in that pedestrian overlay area, the owner is going to put a premium on that. So it's going to be very difficult for us to be able to get rid of that. But it would be a huge benefit if we could, to get rid of all those idling vehicles, to get rid of that parking lot, to get rid of those 3 curb cuts. And in addition to that, we would have an enhanced bus plaza, a curb protected bike lane. And I believe that one of the most important goals of the 2040 plan that you should be seeking to maximize is to enable as many people as possible to live in transit-oriented areas. And I was surprised that they didn't emphasize this in their sustainability report, because it's the most important thing that you can do for sustainability is to enable people to live close to transit. This location is immediately next to the 2, 3, and 6 bus lines, numerous express bus lines, the campus bus line is close to the 4. The E-Line bus rapid transit is scheduled to come there. And when I think about this, I'm thinking, I want to rescue as many suburban commuters as possible and enable them to live close to campus, to be contributing to our tax base, helping pay for our parks and our schools. And I see I have 20 seconds. I just want to emphasize the point about the parking requirements. I was really disappointed that the appellant brought that forward. I at least understand the disagreements about height, but I think the request to deny the variance on parking is indefensible. You've already called for that elimination in the 2040 plan, and if you care about climate, you just declared a climate emergency, the first thing you have to do is stop forcing people to build more auto infrastructure.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yep. Anyone else interested in speaking?
Yes, I'm Kristen Ady Tollefson, and Kathleen Riley was not able to be here today, the chair of the Preserve Historic Dinkytown. She did submit comments, and I will, so I am just going to summarize that the board of Preserve Historic Dinkytown, which I am not on, joins the Marcy Homes Neighborhood Association in supporting the appeal that was presented by Cordelia Pearson, and urges you to sustain the Planning Commission denials, including the FAR and staff recommendations. The thing that I wanted to address briefly, the question about the 10 stories, Chair Schroeder, that you mentioned. What I started doing is going around and counting stories, and just to make you aware that that the bridges is 10 stories. Wahoo is 10 stories. And those are very different scale than we have in Dinkytown. PhD also greatly appreciates the policies in the 2040 plan that do recognize the economic, quote, I'm quoting from policy 60, recognize the economic and intrinsic values of buildings and landscapes that are important to its heritage and integral to defining and framing the character of place. Policy 90 recognizes the importance of neighborhood small business to community development and entrepreneurship. And policies 93 to 95 support creative reuse and stewardship of the city's historic cultural assets, allowing historic properties to evolve while, quote unquote, protecting them from identity changing alterations. And finally, just these plans, both the 2040 and the small area plans, represent thousands of hours of citizens' engagement and significant city investments. And the thing that's different perhaps about Dinkytown is that the people who have been engaged are not just the neighbors, they're students, they're alumni from across the city and further. And so I want to thank you. Dinkytown is a repository of a diverse intergenerational international student culture and history. And the previous testifiers' comments about how important that scale and that accessibility and the feeling of belonging that Dinkytown creates is something I've been hearing for over 40 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else interested in speaking? Anyone else interested in speaking?
My name is Barbara Cam. I'm a resident of Marcy Homes, 423 7th Street Southeast, and I'm also on the executive committee of the Marcy Homes Neighborhood Association Board. I'm going to just read a letter from the Marcy Homes Neighborhood Association Board supporting the appeal of Cordelia Pearson, and some excerpts from a letter that I, as a resident, presented if we have time. Marcy Homes Neighborhood Association is submitting this letter in support of the December 19th, 2019 appeal of CA Ventures ESG request for a CUP and variance for parking, presented by Marcy Homes resident and former board member Cordelia Pearson. As stated in Marcy Homes Neighborhood Association's letter of November 22nd, 2019 to the City Planning Commission, Marcy Homes Neighborhood Association opposes the proposal for this site because it fails to follow guidance of the Minneapolis 2040 plan for height and is not in compliance with the requirements of the University Overlay District with respect to parking. Signed, Vic Thorstensen, President of Marcy Homes Neighborhood Association. My letter, I will not refer to the 2040 plan. I'll just read some excerpts. I'm highlighting some paragraphs from the appeal. Quarter 6, citywide allows for consideration of buildings taller than 6 stories. City policy guidance for this specific 4-block commercial area calls for integration with the 2 to 2.5 story historic buildings and a 6-story maximum to protect the integrity of this area. According to the staff who worked on long-range planning for the area, city planners intentionally selected that Corridor 6 status, not Transit 10, to achieve goals in shaping Dinkytown according to local traditions. The policies do not rely on granting a CUP for a 10-story development. A 10-story building next to a historic district with 2.5-story buildings would overwhelm, not contribute to the area's unique character. Within the commercial district, the tallest buildings are 6 stories, not 10 stories.
Thank you. If you can wrap up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else interested in speaking?
Thank you. Larry Crawford from the Como neighborhood, 1055 14th Avenue Southeast. I urge the Planning Commission to support Cordelia Pearson's appeal of this decision. The Dinkytown zone is too historic, too valuable to allow it to be damaged by a overwhelming 10-story construction adjacent to the traditional and heritage streetscape of the area. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else interested in speaking?
Good morning. I'm Ted Tucker, 319 5th Street Southeast, Minneapolis, a 40-year member of Marcy Homes Neighborhood Association already. But I am representing myself, not the association today. I'm delighted that we have a proposal to replace surface parking lots in Dinkytown with mixed use, residences and retail serving the university community. I'm also delighted we have a new 2040 plan to help the guidance of this development. And as referred by others, the land use map calls for mixed use. That's been proposed. It also calls for C6. That's the 6-story, 2 to 6. It grants exceptions for other goals of the 2040 being met. So if the extra 4 stories were affordable housing, you would have masses of students here today in support of that. If the extra bulk provided for enabled a grocery store, you would have many people here as well. But I think the community benefits suggested don't justify the exceptions being requested. The zoning is entirely appropriate. The FAR variance, I think, is your key issue, and without that, the project, I think, probably fails. I had a particular interest in the site plan review, which staff suggested should be denied, mostly on the FAR, but there's also that alley that Councilmember Goodman has noted, which has an exit that I believe is very dangerous. Vehicles would come across a very busy sidewalk on 4th Street, go across a future protected bike lane, go across a high-frequency bus lane, and then out to 4th Street. And this is in a pedestrian overlay district where we're trying to improve the safety of pedestrians, of cyclists, and of transit users. So whether it's this proposal or another, I think that exit onto 4th needs to be reconsidered. I did want to mention the developer has been very good in talking to the community, many meetings. We gathered the largest number of students ever to a land use meeting. That was excellent. And we hope that they do find the proper solution that conforms to the 2040 plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else interested in speaking?
Hi, my name is Lynn. My last name's Nyman. I am the owner of the Loring Bar and Restaurant. I also own the property. I know some of you. I know some of you from the Seward neighborhood, from the Loring neighborhood, and of course Steve Fletcher. I feel pretty strongly about the character of Dinkytown, and the word has been said again and again and again. And now we have some topics of sustainability, and it's like character versus sustainability to me is where it seems to be ending up. I respect the efforts for the sustainability. I really have enjoyed the engagement with these guys. I will, however, move in the other direction that we need to keep the building shorter, not so tall. We can't rebuild the character of Dinkytown. We've been through this already with the Marshall. We went through it with the venue. I've been in groups with Kelly Doran. I get it. You know, I know there's things they have to do to make these things work. I just think that that particular spot is too valuable to change it, to mess with the height and the character of Dinkytown. There should be another solution, and I think somebody can find it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Chris Coyne. I live at 419 5th Street Southeast. This city spent the last couple of years laying out a development plan for the city stretching 20 years into the future. There was pushback to the 2040 plan, and I would say, having attended many of Heather Worthington's neighborhood talking sessions about it, that the majority of the population was opposed to many of the principal elements of the plan. But of course, the debate is over, and is now moot. The city has passed the plan, and it's now the municipal policy that governs development throughout the city moving forward. One of the selling points of the 2040 plan, and this was promoted as a benefit by both Heather Worthington and my city council member Steve Fletcher, was that it would eliminate the arbitrary and I would suggesting capricious use of variances by developers to get greater heights for greater profits. So I would ask that you support Cordelia Pearson's appeal. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else interested in speaking? Anyone else interested in speaking? Last call. All right, I'm going to close the hearing and see if there's any discussion among my colleagues. We have the two appeals before us. Council President.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And for the purpose of discussion, I would move to deny the second appeal, and I would offer to move to postpone item one cycle. We've heard from the development team that there is no opportunity to adjust this project, but I think that would be the best case scenario in terms of getting a project similar to this one with a lot of the benefits we've heard built here. So that would be an offer I have for discussion. If folks want to ask questions of the development team or not, I'm open to that, but I don't plan to.
Great. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to make sure I understand. You want that the council president is suggesting denying the appeal in number 2, but postponing the appeal in item number 1? That's correct. So essentially giving them an opportunity to reduce their FAR, but they're saying they won't do that. I kind of feel like they've heard pretty loud and clear from us that they've been rejected twice and it's not probably heading in their direction now. So I'm not sure delaying the inevitable makes a ton of sense. To be fair, I support denying the appeal in item number 2, but to me that would also be paired with denying the FAR appeal in item number 1. I think that's the cleanest way to do it. I also just want to make a point about this. In my ward and around the city, small area plans as well as business district plans were included in the 2040 planning. A good example of that would be if they weren't in this location, it probably would have been Transit 15, because it's in a very major transit area. So I think that the council member and the staff did a good job of attempting to think through how this would be perceived and ensure that the historic character would be retained as best it could by agreeing on Transit 6 instead of on Transit 10 and Transit 15. The 2040 plan, however, now is the guiding document, and although you have heard that there's some uncertainty with regard to it being in limbo, it still doesn't mean to me that 6 means exactly 6 stories and 10 means exactly 10 stories. We don't know that yet, but I feel fairly strongly that we should deny item number 1. Because I think the FAR request is completely out of line, and I can live with the outcome if the outcome is that they don't move forward on the project and they're building projects downtown, and that's a great place for really high density and really high FAR, and I'd welcome you to do that in parts of downtown where you're already building, but I don't think that that kind of thing is appropriate here. So I would prefer a motion that would deny both. That probably doesn't mean anything to Council President, but I kind of feel like I have to say no to 1 if I'm going to say no to 2. Item 1 and item 2, sorry. That's
No, you're good. Councilmember Gordon?
Well, sometime Councilmember Goodman and I agree. I'll just take a moment to enjoy this.
Are you stopping there, or are you going to keep talking?
Performance. Okay. Those who follow this stuff might understand. I think also it's an artful compromise to think we could delay one thing in hopes of a change, and I'm not quite sure how that would be different than just denying the FAR. It also might be easier for me if we considered both of them separately and had one motion on one and one the other, but I know staff report's been combined, it's all combined, and it's all together, I guess. But I suppose someone could help me make the case saying postpone it will make it easier for them to come back with an alternative where the FAR meets our requirements. But it also seems like if we just denied it, then they'd also be in the same situation, and it would be even clearer. Because now I'm worried that if we postpone it, they'll think I'm going to try to get some more candy to add to this, some more good stuff. I'll make it net zero. I'll get the grocery store lined up, and then I can be able to violate the rules of the city. But I think we should change our rules if we don't think we want to make it a variance requirement for FAR. And if we do, then there should be practical difficulties that are above and beyond economics. That's just what I think the rules should be. Otherwise, we're going to be on a really slippery slope, granting variances all over the place, because certainly economics are going to drive whole lots of decisions, and it's a practical difficulty. My investors won't be happy. They won't make enough money out of this project. I can't get enough from my rents to make it work financially. Well, that's not the kind of practical difficulty I think that we're supposed to be looking at when it comes to variances. So that's why I think delaying it might be a little bit misleading, because I do think there is a sense from the developers that if we add more community benefits, that will justify the variance. But the fact of the matter is, even under the new rules, what we're saying is if the height could be a conditional use and it could be based on some other criteria that aren't practical difficulties. But the variance is based on practical difficulties that are not economic. And so that's why I'm a little worried about the postponement would be misleading. But to make sure nobody would be misled by any vote I take, I thought I should make that little speech that I just made so it's clear for everybody. And I will add that I appreciated a lot of those sustainability efforts, and I think there are places in the city, if you look at the comprehensive plan, where this kind of height would be desired, even this kind of density. And I know that some council members might be trying to pull you towards downtown, but there's other places, even near the university, even over in Prospect Park and in the Towerside Innovation District and other places where this kind of thing could be welcomed better. And I'll just add that I agree, a mixed-use project here makes a lot of sense that would fit. The surface parking lot and the drive-through don't make any sense, and there's and bringing the density would also help, build on the transit corridors and all that. Okay, that's enough. Thanks for your patience.
No apology necessary. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think staff has kindly answered one of the questions, but I think might be worth pausing and just reminding ourselves what, in an email to me, but what happens when we deny a project. Usually it means that if it's not substantially different, they can't, it creates a clock of a year before a new application can come in, is my recollection of the rules. And so, yeah, my intention of postponing one of the items was because of the significant change that happened from the denial at Planning Commission to the project that we see before us, which I think, again, is going in the right direction in a super transit-rich part of town where the bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure is terrible, having led to fatality here, where a drive-through is clearly not in the vision of our growing city, where housing is needed. So I think where we've seen a huge commitment to sustainability principles in the design, absent any guidance from the city about what that means. So, I mean, I think there are a lot of merits to this project in the direction that it's going. I think the team has made a clear case for the conditional use permit for height. So my intention was to see if there's any way that a project like this could happen here, again, given the current conditions versus what might be able to be built here, instead of having a drive-through in perpetuity. I think that would be a real shame.
All right, now.
So that maybe ask staff what happened.
So staff what would have, so again, if this is denied, they would have 1 year, and it would have to be substantially different. And for me, could you talk a little bit about the substantial difference, because that's important.
Yes. So to clarify, there is a provision in the zoning code that states that a project can not be submitted unless it's substantially. A project that's gone through and been denied, cannot be resubmitted within a 1-year period unless it's substantially different. And so what we look at for that is what applications are required. You know, if it's a similar set of land use applications, what has the change been in the height and the FAR? For a site plan review, we look at our major versus minor changes and what would be triggering any new alternative compliance. So in the situation we're in right now, we determined that the changes that occurred between Planning Commission and the Zoning and Planning Committee weren't enough to say that it was a new project. So it's the same FAR, no new alternative compliance was triggered. You know, some of the perspectives of the building are generally the same. But in this instance, if it were to be outright denied, then they would have to do a really substantial redesign in order for us to consider it a new project with a different set of applications without requiring that 1-year waiting period.
A follow-up question on that. So what a reduction in FAR, are we talking half a point, 2 points? Can you give us kind of an idea of what's historically triggered that?
So theoretically, if we're looking at a request to have them bring the height down to 6 stories, that would be a substantially different building. So if it were denied and they came back with a 6-story building, I think we would say that that's different enough that it would be something that could be considered without the 1-year waiting period.
Well, I think just for the point of discussion, I mean, 10 to 6 is pretty different, but is 10 to 9, 10 to 6, 10 to 8, like what types of things would that also be considered different? I want to make sure we're not closing a door on something that there seems to be. I also, to the applicant, want to point out that for myself, if this project had gone through Planning Commission, we'd be having a different discussion. Like there's just a lot of thoughtfulness and a lot of conversation that could have been had with the community that you could have now that wasn't there when you started. And I think that that's kind of what I'm trying to suss out up here is trying to figure out if this is going to be the same. I don't want to close the door on something that's going to shut down where you're headed. And at the same time, if you will have the opportunity to make those changes without triggering the 1 year, that would be helpful to know.
Substantial reductions in floor area is what the major versus minor changes portion of the site plan review section says. We look at typically at like a 10% threshold. So.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Gordon, or not so much? Councilmember Ellison?
I can support postponing this item. I think that if even though the developer has said that, we can't change anything about the project, if they would like the opportunity 2 weeks to, or if we think that it's possible, and if we have seen major changes from the first time they presented this until this committee, then I could support postponing this because I do think I think some of the sustainability stuff is good. I think that the increase, having affordability in this area is good. Getting rid of the parking lot and the drive-through, I think, are good. And so I'm open to that. Really open to either option, but just wanted to voice that I'd be open to postponing this item for a cycle.
Thank you. I would like to actually hear from the applicant if that's something with what would you be able to do with the delay? Because I am leaning with Councilmember Goodman that, I mean, it makes sense to be very clear and concise with this, right, especially when I've heard you say nothing can change. Right. But I also want to be clear that, you're putting us in a great spot. We'd like to be able to talk about where this could go, but also just from at least the chair's perspective, I would prefer stuff go through Planning Commission. We have experts that are giving their time to the city, and I think they would love to hear more about this project as is now, as opposed to what it was before. But if you could speak to the delay.
As far as the delay goes, I guess the question would have to be of what caliber would the FAR reduction. So if we're talking, going down to 6 stories and meeting the FAR, we would have to significantly roll back all the community benefits at that point. So if we don't want to be bold and bring a project like this forward with all these great benefits, it's going to be very difficult for us to make work. Now, an FAR reduction of a small caliber, I think we can look at making work and make that work. I just don't know what the scale of that is, and I think that's kind of the arbitrariness of this I don't have it in my head. It takes quite a bit of analysis for us to look at what that would entail and what that would be. So it's very hard for me to tell at this point, but I think the time would be certainly very helpful to reassess, because I mean, like I said, this is a lot of owners coming together, and it's aligned right now where if it does get denied, those owners have other plans, and we could be stuck with the drive-through for a long time.
Okay, thank you. Council President Bender's motion is before us. Council Member Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for letting me join in. I just wanted to comment. I think you've heard very well the tension around this site from the community. I think the testimony that you heard, both that I think the small area plan and the business district plan were incorporated into the 2040 plan. It would not be Corridor 6 if we hadn't had that conversation and that thought. And so that I do think that there's a tension around asking about the integrity of the plan. If we were to do something that looked really different from Corridor 6 after we had agreed to Corridor 6, which does not mean it needs to be 6 stories. I agree with what everybody said there, that there's latitude within that definition. But I do think they're pushing the absolute upper boundary, and I think have probably heard from all of you that they're probably on the wrong side of that upper boundary. And I think that might make sense. That said, you also heard what an opportunity it is for this site, for the bikeability and walkability of the neighborhood, for some of the significant improvements we heard from the small business next door. There's a lot of things about that site that are not good right now. And so if there is a couple weeks that we can look at it and, see if they can come in a way that isn't, I think, violating the integrity of the community agreement that we all voted on last year and made, I'd support that delay so that they could explore that.
Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's no practical difficulty to get a variance here. It's pretty simple. That's the law. There's no practical difficulty. They got up and admitted that and said it was completely economic. So I want to make sure folks are aware of that. 2, no land is being made in the city. Land is valuable. The cost of land is always going to go up. Something will get developed here because a McDonald's is not the highest and best use. And I'll note all this credit we're giving them for doing inclusionary zoning. If this project fails and another one comes forward, they'll be forced to do it. So this great community benefit is something that some people on this panel led through the council to make sure it happened. So this isn't that great of a community benefit. Everyone's going to have to do it going forward. It's not really a hardship. So I'm uncomfortable with the delay because I think it puts the public, the neighbors, in a bad spot. That this get negotiated behind the scenes, then it's not a public hearing, then they can't comment, then all of a sudden there's a compromise, they're not involved in it. I just am not comfortable with that because I'm comfortable with denying the second appeal. And I just don't think it's fair then we should postpone both and let them give more testimony, but I don't think that's right either. So I kind of feel like it boils down to what is the law. I'm sure we're going to hear that a lot in this committee meeting going forward today. And here you need to have a practical difficulty. There is not one. Economics is not a practical difficulty, and I think the FAR is too high. I probably could live with an FAR higher than what would be allowed, but not at this level. They should come back for something different, go through the process again, and not leave the neighbors wondering what's going to happen next.
Councilmember Gordon.
So if we did deny it today, that's not the final decision. That would still go forward to the council. So even a denial would give them some time to see if they couldn't come up with something different and work for a little while and maybe work quickly and maybe work hard enough so that it would be held over at the council. That said, I just wanted to put that out there for all of you, and me realizing if I voted to deny, if we ever had that motion in front of us, that would also be going on there. But I also really appreciated what the chair said about projects going through the Planning Commission yield a much bigger benefit to the city. And that's another thing that I'm concerned about this delay. So then we'll hold it in our committee and it will come back in 2 weeks and we'll have to handle the full review with staff having a short amount of time to handle it too and see how significant it is and what is there and what isn't there and is it, I don't know. So I don't think that's doing good governance either. I wish you'd all foreshadowed what your vote was going to be on this matter, because if we don't postpone it and then we grant the appeal, well, that's going to be a different story either. So postpone would be kind of a nice compromise there. But so I welcome you guys to foreshadow for me to help me with my vote if you want to.
Council President Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, my prediction from what we've heard so far was that the height would be supported by this committee and that the FAR would not be. And so, again, in the spirit of feeling like this project was pretty close to being able to be supported, the delay seemed worth considering. And I guess I would say a couple things here just while my microphone's on. I think, again, we've passed a new comprehensive plan, but, it's not like the light switched on January 1st, drastically changing everything in our city. We've been, for years together, considering applications for development projects, doing our best to make sure they fit in with the spirit and intention of our plans and zoning guidance. I would really encourage my colleagues who are committed to sustainability goals, to, with some expediency, bring forward some proposals so that developers have any idea what to expect. I knew that affordable housing was a huge priority, so I've worked for 5 years to bring forward an inclusionary zoning policy that's predictable and clear. And I know developers didn't love that idea, or a lot of them didn't support it, but now at least you know what you need to do. You can put it in your pro forma. You're not standing up here being asked if you have a geothermal powered grocery store in your project before it's even been approved. And I think the amount of uncertainty that we create when we have expectations that are not clearly articulated are concerning and counter to all of the work that we have been doing to make our goals clear and predictable. So again, we're in a transition period. It's as Councilmember Gordon said, it's not, it's just to acknowledge where we are. But I think if we have high expectations for sustainability in buildings, we need to articulate what those are and be clear upfront so that projects can conform to them and comply to them. I've never heard a committee member ever in my 6 years in office ask this level of detailed questions about energy sustainability. I'm glad we are now. I mean, it's exciting. I'm excited to see that because we're interested, now projects are going to bring in experts on energy systems and sustainability, but we need to also acknowledge that is new, that wasn't an expectation when this project began a year or more ago, and I think have some level of clarity about where we are in this process of policymaking and how it's going to affect individual projects. So anyway, all that said, I think the intention of a delay, I also agree with and acknowledge that it creates some uncertainty and more work for folks, which is not ideal. But I felt that this project was close enough to a yes that it was worth seeing if there was more time. If my colleagues don't agree, then I'm not going to be offended. I just was offering a solution to moving forward.
Thank you, Council President. Just for Councilmember Gordon's request, I would, right at this point, not support the delay for all the reasons you articulated. I would support the variance for height, and I would not read, and I would continue my vote to deny the FAR change for a couple reasons. I think, to the Council President's point about sustainability, as one of the council members besides Councilmember Gordon and Councilmember Reich working on these issues, we're just in a space that there's a lot you can do. And so there's the dilemma of, do you set, here are the clear standards every person has to do, or do we let developers work with what they're more familiar with to get to the same outcomes? Like, we are very serious about fighting climate change, and I don't think we're picky about how people get there, as long as it's in an equitable way. So how do we get to that same goal? I would say that we've worked with developers that have had sustainability as their first goal, and they have worked with the city, and it's been the first thing they talk about when they get on the phone with us. And we are happy to work with anybody. I think there's an excitement among staff and amongst my colleagues to do that. So I encourage anyone that wants to make sustainability a part of their development to do that early. I really appreciate what the developer came out with. It is impressive. I just want to be very clear with that. I think what would make this, take that to the next level, a lot of the programs you're talking about, they are external corporate companies that we have a lot of those programs in the city, especially when you're talking about food reuse and food capture, just to name one example. So the more you can integrate what we're already trying to do, the more you're speaking to being a part of the community and being a part of the city. So that's something that would be helpful. Not seeing anyone else. The council president's motion is before us for the delay. All those in okay. All those in favor say aye. All those for the delay? No. All those opposed say no? No. So that fails. I'll entertain another motion. Council Member Goodman's motion to deny number 1. Denying 1 and 2. Council President Bittner.
Mr. Chair, can we vote on them separately just for clarity purposes?
Sure. On Council Members Goodman on number 1, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. Now move to number 2, a denial on number. Move to deny number 2. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and that motion carries. We'll now move on to number 3 and 4, and those are both quasi-judicial hearings related to the Zoning Board of Adjustment's decision to deny applications submitted by Burger King Corporation for certifications of non-conforming use for the drive-through facilities at 2 locations, 3342 Nicollet Avenue and 818 West Broadway. Since these appeals were both submitted by the same applicant for the same type of application, we're going to handle both of them together. And first, I have a staff presentation.
Good afternoon, Chair Schrader and council members. Before you today are 2 appeals of the decisions of the Zoning Board of Adjustment regarding denial of certificates of non-conforming use applications at 3342 Nicollet and 818 West Broadway. The applicant is seeking to reestablish fast food restaurants and drive-through facilities at both of these properties. 3342 Nicollet is located in the C1 district and is occupied by a single-story commercial building built in 1964, which was utilized as a fast food restaurant with a drive-through facility from its construction until April 2018. 818 West Broadway is located in the C2 district and the West Broadway Overlay District. Was built in 1993 and was likewise utilized as a fast food restaurant with a drive-through use from its construction until April of 2018. At the time of the closure of these uses in April 2018, the fast food and drive-through facility uses at both properties were non-conforming uses. In the case of 3342 Nicollet, the uses became non-conforming in 1999 when the new zoning code was adopted and the site was rezoned to C1. And in the case of 818 West Broadway, those uses became non-conforming in 2009 with the establishment of the West Broadway Overlay District. Because these uses were lawfully established but did not comply with the current ordinance, they were considered lawfully established non-conforming uses and were permitted to continue to operate indefinitely as long as they were neither abandoned and remained otherwise lawful. The circumstances under which a non-conforming use is considered abandoned are described in Chapter 531 of the zoning ordinance. In general, once a non-conforming use has ceased for a year or more, it is presumed to be abandoned. The ordinance does provide the opportunity for a property owner to rebut the presumption of abandonment by submitting clear and convincing evidence that the discontinuation of the use was outside of their control. Because the non-conforming uses at the properties ceased in April 2018 and the applicant did not begin the process to reestablish those uses until more than 1 year had elapsed, the uses are presumed to be abandoned. The applicant, Burger King Corporation, applied for the 2 certificates of non-conforming use to rebut this presumption of abandonment. The applicant submitted significant documentation regarding the bankruptcy of the former franchisee that operated these 2 locations, and I'm sure they'll speak to that today. Staff did not find that the submitted materials satisfied the rebuttal of abandonment provision in the ordinance and recommended that the Board of Adjustment deny the applications. At their December 12th, 2019 meeting, the Zoning Board of Adjustment adopted the staff findings and denied both applications. The applicant has appealed both of those denials, and those are the appeals before you today. I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
So I do have a question. How involved was the city attorney in making those, being consulted about the denials?
We had a brief conversation with the city attorney's office regarding the applications. In the end, the staff recommendation was made by the zoning administrator, not the city attorney. The zoning administrator chose to take a relatively narrow look at this, looking at just our ordinance. I'm sure the appellant will talk to you about some state statute and case law. We narrowed our analysis to what's in our ordinance.
Thank you. And then if I could get some guidance from the city attorney, clear and convincing is a very set legal standard. If you wouldn't mind kind of saying, is this a really hard standard to meet, or kind of what should we be listening for as we take testimony?
Mr. Chair, thank you, and committee members. It is correct. Staff did consult with the city attorney's office and myself, and also interim city attorney Nelson did review the matter. We did advise staff that the evidence and the affidavit submitted by the applicant in this matter did appear to address the rebuttal requirements that are found in our ordinance. And just to let the committee know, there's a couple different ways that abandonment is dealt with nationwide, and there's one set of states or jurisdictions which allow for abandonment to be established purely by discontinuance. And then there are other jurisdictions, Minneapolis included, which allow for a rebuttal of that abandonment presumption. In the state of Minnesota as a whole, cities aren't required to allow for the rebuttal of abandonment. I think it is a policy question as to whether our ordinance, whether it's the desire of the council to have an ordinance which provides for the rebuttal of abandonment, but the fact is that we do. And so this isn't a policy question about drive-throughs. It's a technical question about the application of our existing law. It does require clear and convincing evidence. That simply means it's a standard that is elevated above the standard civil standard, which would just be the preponderance of the evidence, but it certainly is not equivalent to the criminal standard that is applied in criminal cases. So it does mean essentially that there has to be very convincing and substantial evidence that would rebut the presumption of abandonment. On its face, there does appear to be a lot of affirmative actions attempted to be taken by the applicant in this matter within the 1-year period of discontinuance and continuing throughout that period that appear to have been frustrated by the bankruptcy proceeding that took place in this case. And so based upon that, I think that's what's before this committee and what's before the council is, again, just clearly an application of this technical legal requirement. And I believe, upon a review of the application, that certainly does contain on its face the type of evidence that would address the rebuttlement of abandonment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Goodman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to try to put this into real people's terms. If there is not an operating business and there's not anything going on the site, most people would consider it to be abandoned. So I'm not going to argue about the ordinance that I was the co-author of. I'm going to argue about the negativity of an abandoned building and or an abandoned site in a neighborhood. And I'd be hoping that the applicant's lawyers can come and explain to us all of the efforts they underwent over a year to green the site, to clean the site, to light the site, and to make it appear as though it was not abandoned. Because to me, the general public looks at a property that has, crumbling infrastructure, no lighting, no greening, no proactive activity, and they say that's abandoned. And so I don't at all criticize the zoning administrator for suggesting that something that looks the way these sites have looked are abandoned. And so I'd like to hear more from our staff about how, are we just saying, well, you can do nothing with it? It's a non-conforming use, you're not occupying it, it looks like hell. But you have some rights because there's been a bankruptcy, and so we can't do anything if there's been a bankruptcy. That's not true. The property owner could have done a playground on that site to make it look not abandoned. My understanding is these sites have been empty in areas of town that, quite frankly, shouldn't have. It's okay. Let me tell you, if this was in Kenwood, you wouldn't have an abandoned site looking the way these sites look. So apparently it's okay if it's on West Broadway or, in somewhere in South Minneapolis. So I want to hear more about that.
Thank you. Not seeing any other questions for staff. At this point, I'll open up the hearing, and I'll first give the applicant the opportunity to speak to the committee. Is there a representative from Burger King Corporation?
Is it still morning? Good morning. Carol Lansing, now Fagri Drinker Biddle and Reth, representing Burger King Corporation. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to speak with you on the appeal. With me today is Katerina Gliptis. She's the general manager for the Central Division of Burger King Corporation. Beth Leone, she's the area manager for this region. Paul Batista, who is the attorney who represented Burger King in the bankruptcy proceedings, and he'll be speaking to you after I do. And Kevin Kinney is here. He's the director of operations for Cave Enterprises, the franchisee that would like to reopen these stores. And Cave does look forward to engaging with the council members and the community about the conditions of the sites and going forward how they can stay engaged with the community and not have those kinds of issues. With respect to the conditions of the site, Councilmember Goodman, we're not making an excuse for that. They have been doing a better job, but you can certainly take that as evidence of abandonment, but I think there is a lot of other evidence that shows that was not their intent to abandon, and that's not a controlling factor of what the site looks like as opposed to what they intend to do with the operation.
Is intent a standard here?
Well, I will talk to you, follow up on what Mr. Fussy said about how intent is relevant under state case law to your decision.
I would be interested in hearing how intent makes a difference.
Yeah.
I can only go by what I can see on those sites, and they look abandoned to me.
And so I'm going to tell you the how we got here story, and you've heard some of it, so I'll try to be brief. But and then Paul will talk to you about the bankruptcy. First, I did want to make a correction. In the letter I sent yesterday, I said these were the only 2 Burger King sites in Minneapolis. That's not true. There are 4 others that are operated by different franchisees than the one that went bankrupt and had control of these 2 sites. Burger King has long-term leases for these properties. The Broadway property lease began in 2000 and extends to 2040, and the Nicollet property lease began in 1970 and under the current lease rights extends to 2034. Burger King subleases its sites to franchisees who then operate the stores. And the franchisee, in this case P3 Foods, operated these 2 plus 7 others in Minnesota and filed for bankruptcy in 2016, but continued to operate the stores. Their financial condition continued to deteriorate, however. The bankruptcy was changed to Chapter 11. A trustee was appointed to control the assets, and the stores were closed. And the assets include fixtures, furniture, and equipment, which is not easily removed either because some of it's attached. Burger King learned that these restaurants were non-conforming when the franchisee that they were ultimately able to engage to reopen the stores went to the city in May 2019 to start talking about remodeling. And that was like 13 months after the stores had closed, but they wouldn't have been able to open them even then because of the restrictions of the bankruptcy. Burger King then engaged a local planning consultant to help them understand these issues and respond to them with staff. They submitted information to staff in July, or they met with staff in July, submitted information in September, and in October I was brought on to help put this appeal in front of the board and you. So the legal standard is under the city ordinance. Was it beyond, you can rebut a presumption, that your ordinance lets you rebut the presumption, and they phrase it as was the discontinuance for reasons out of Burger King's control. State statutes talk about rebutting a presumption of abandonment. That's what the ordinance says. You can rebut a presumption of abandonment, and it uses those words, abandonment. And state's case law talks about abandonment as things for you to consider. Did Burger King have an intent to abandon the use? So the case law specifically says you look at their intent. And then also look at, did Burger King overtly act or fail to act in a way that indicates they no longer claimed a right to the non-conforming use? And I understand Councilmember Goodman will say not taking care of the property is an overt act, but you have to weigh that with all of the other things to evaluate their intent. I think that staff and the board misapplied this standard, the clear and convincing standard, and basically we're saying you have to show us that there's no doubt, that there's no conceivable way that you couldn't have reopened it. I want to point out that when the city attorney's office looked at this and advised staff that they thought that the record did support rebuttal of abandonment, that was before staff did their report. It's before the Board of Zoning Adjustment had their hearing. It was before we submitted any evidence regarding bankruptcy, because it wasn't until we saw the staff report that they said you haven't, well, maybe not no evidence of bankruptcy. We had submitted information about the bankruptcy, but the affidavit from Paul Bautista came after that. So the city attorney's office didn't even have that information in front of them, and they felt that the case I'm hearing had been made. And also the board's decision, I was impermissibly influenced by the disfavor that drive-thrus are currently under. That's not relevant to out of control or intent. And this should be evaluated like you would evaluate any use that is considered more favorably. Staff and the board also put considerable emphasis on the fact that the Burger King didn't come to them before the year ran. That's factually and legally irrelevant. It's certainly not relevant to whether they had control over the bankruptcy or their intent. And there's no requirement in the ordinance or policy that says you need to check in with us. So we believe the presumption of abandonment has been rebutted. We believe these factors show Burger King's intent. They have long-term leases on both properties, and they've continued to pay rent on those. Even if the care of them could have been better taken, they certainly weren't evidencing an intent to abandon the use on properties that they have such long-term leases on and are paying rent. They immediately began the search for a new franchisee. They've started first I learned this yesterday, by talking to those other local franchisees to see if they would step in. A couple of them said no in pretty short order. A third one took some amount of time to do their due diligence, ultimately said no. So then they approached Cave, which is based out of Chicago, but is willing to expand their operations up here. And so by December, with less than a year, they had a new franchisee identified. So that is also evidence of their intent to reopen these stores. And then, Cave began efforts to look at remodeling the stores, also evidence of intent. So I believe the case has been rebutted on that alone, but we also have Paul here to run through the bankruptcy issues with you and any questions you have about that.
Thank you. Not seeing any questions.
Good afternoon, actually, Mr. Chair and council members. It's actually my first time appearing before you, and I think my second time in the state of Minnesota. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Paul Batista. I'm a bankruptcy lawyer, and I'm with the firm called Genovese, Job Love, and Batista. I've been practicing bankruptcy law now for almost 34 years. I've had the honor, at least in this case, representing Burger King Corporation in the bankruptcy of P3 Foods that started in October 2016, and actually through today, the case is still open. It's not going to affect what we're doing here today, but that bankruptcy case continues today, 3.5 years later. I've also had the opportunity and the honor of representing Burger King Corporation for now over 20 years in literally every one of their franchisee bankruptcies that have occurred in the country, from Anchorage, Alaska, to San Diego, to northern Maine, and down to South Florida. So it's fair to say I think I have a pretty good flavor as to how to deal with bankruptcy issues for franchisees and how to quickly get Burger King positioned to reopen their restaurants. And I've seen a great deal of it. I've heard from Ms. Lansing and my client that there are concerns and perhaps some uncertainty about what happened in the bankruptcy and why it took us over a year to get these restaurants repositioned to be refranchised. I can tell you that bankruptcies last a long time. It's just the nature of the beast. We, of course, were the franchisor. We were the landlord leasing the property to P3 Foods. We did not have any interest, ownership or otherwise, in the furniture, fixtures, and equipment and inventory that was inside each one of these restaurants. It's an important fact because that is ultimately what prevented us to get control of these restaurants, to reposition them for over a year. I want to start by saying I can assure you that from the day that I was hired, in this case by Burger King, right to the end, we did everything possible within the constraints of the bankruptcy code and with the reality of bankruptcy to achieve this result. I submitted an affidavit in support. I'm not going to go through that and reiterate it, but I do want to highlight several things because I think it's important for you to have a flavor as to what occurred here. So P3 Foods filed bankruptcy in October 2016. They filed a Chapter 11. That's a reorganization statute. One of the principal benefits of bankruptcy is that you get, as a debtor, as the company who files, the benefit of the automatic stay. It's also a constraint. So what does the automatic stay mean? It means that no creditor, that would include Burger King Corporation, can take any action to collect on amounts owed against P3 Foods. We can't take any action to evict them from our premises, and we can't take any action to terminate the franchise agreements. We are stayed from doing any of that throughout the course of the bankruptcy. That constraint is what has caused us the delay of over a year to get here. Bankruptcy courts generally are very debtor-friendly. Right? You go to bankruptcy court, you go in there for protection, and bankruptcy judges around the country and bankruptcy courts are very protective of the debtor and also very protective of that automatic stay. It is not common, in fact, it's very difficult to get a bankruptcy court to say, you don't have to worry about the automatic stay. There's a process in which you can do that, but it's very difficult to achieve it, especially as a debtor is trying to reorganize, which was happening here with P3 Foods. So they operated for 18 months in their bankruptcy, and ultimately circumstances were such that they couldn't pay their bills, and the case converted to a Chapter 7. What does that mean? That means that operations cease, the restaurants close down, and the franchisee and its employees just go away. And so the property is left to whoever owns it to deal with it. And that's, Burger King had to deal with that. The other thing that happens, interestingly and importantly, is the Department of Justice appoints what's known as a Chapter 7 trustee, who's a third-party independent panel trustee that takes over that particular bankruptcy case, principally the assets of the entity and any business operations. Of course, I just told you that the business operations had to shut down. So what does the trustee have? The trustee has the lease with us, the franchise agreement with us, and all of that furniture, fixtures, and equipment inside the restaurants. That's what the trustee has. Bankruptcy trustees, when they get appointed, have a great deal of power. Not as much as the judge, but a great deal of power and control over those assets. And their job is to secure the assets, marshal the assets, and monetize them, sell them, create as much value as possible. In this case, the trustee was a guy named Zane Zielinski. Mr. Zielinski took his job very seriously, as do most trustees. In this case, he actually hired his own lawyer, which is relatively unusual for a Chapter 7 trustee to do, because he wanted to create value with the assets that existed with P3 Foods. So the case gets converted. What do? Burger King went in pretty quickly, and we got the bankruptcy court to agree to terminate our leases. We got the bankruptcy court to agree to terminate our franchise agreements. But we still had the constraint of the furniture, fixtures, and equipment, many of it attached to our property inside each one of these locations. We didn't own it. We didn't have a lien on it. It was just in our property. And the trustee refused to remove it. Why? Because the trustee's idea of this was, I'm going to try to sell these restaurants as going concerns, albeit they're already shut down. That's kind of difficult to do. Someone have to restart it. And/or I'm going to try to sell all the furniture, fixtures, and equipment in each location. Importantly, the automatic stay that I just told you about continues throughout a Chapter 7. So when it converts from an 11, a reorganization statute, to a 7, a liquidation statute, the automatic stay still continues. Burger King and every other creditor still cannot, without court approval, take over the assets or deal with the assets. And so we had this difficult situation. To make matters worse, there were at least 2 banks involved in this case. One was PNC, the larger bank. They had a lien on all the furniture, fixtures, and equipment inside our restaurants owned by P3 Foods. And at one point in this case, the trustee, Mr. Zielinski, and PNC got into a fight over whether the lien was valid, not valid, and if the assets were sold, who gets the money? Trustee obviously wanted all the money. The bank said, no, we want all the money. And so that took a good bit of time for them to resolve that issue. All the while, this stuff is sitting in our restaurants. We tried more than once with the trustee to say, please come get the stuff and take it out and put it in storage. His answer was no. I want to sell the restaurants, or I want to sell the FF&E inside the restaurants, because that's how I'm going to get the most value. If I take apart a walk-in freezer and put it up in the storage facility, I'm not going to get as much as if it's sitting in place in the restaurants. And so from May of 2018, when the bankruptcy converted to Chapter 7, to November of 2018, that roughly 6-month period, the trustee tried to find buyers for the FF&E. This is in my affidavit. He would come to us every couple of weeks, another buyer. Then the buyer would say, I'm not interested, after going and looking at the stuff. Trustee, again, was unwilling to remove it and was unwilling to let us remove it. I even offered, we'll pay to dismantle it, move it out, and put it in the storage. Answer was no. And so, given the power that he had in this case, we continued to work with him to try to deal with this. As I told you, he and the bank got into a fight over the asset value and the lien. That occurred in about December 2018, outlined in my affidavit. That fight went on with me trying to be in the middle of it to act as a mediator from that period, December 18 to May of 2019. It seems like a long period of time, but they're fighting over $500,000 worth of what they believe to be value, which frankly did not exist in that FF&E. And we were sitting there watching this fight happen and could not do very much, if anything, about it. It wasn't until May of 2019 that the trustee and PNC finally resolved those issues and came to us and said, okay, we have settled our issues. Batista, we want to auction off the FF&E. And so the trustee then hired one auctioneer and then fired that auctioneer a few weeks later, hired another auctioneer, and then finally that auctioneer got in, took pictures, did an online auction, and then removed all the stuff. But that didn't occur until early November of 2019. So you can get a picture that from conversion of the case to Chapter 7 and the trustee appointed and the restaurant shut down in April and May of 2018, all of that stuff happening until November 2019 before we could actually get that stuff out of there and then come to you all to try to refranchise or get approval to keep the drive-thrus open and refranchise it.
I think you've got a question from Councilmember Goodman.
I'm sorry.
So I've heard your whole story. So you own the building, right?
We don't own the building. We lease the building from a third party. It's a long-term lease.
So who was responsible for the upkeep of the building, the grounds, the property, et cetera?
It was during the Chapter 11. It would have been P3 Foods. After the conversion to Chapter 7, it wasn't until the lease was rejected. Until then, meaning the lease was terminated through the bankruptcy court, P3 Foods or the bankruptcy trustee had the obligation to maintain that. And at some point in time, I don't have the exact date, but I can get it, when the leases were terminated, then control of the real estate would have come back to Burger King Corporation.
So on this timeline that Ms. Lansing gave us, where does your ability to come back and do anything
Well, our ability to come back and do
improve
what?
the property?
Sort of, meaning clean up the grounds as opposed to dealing with refranchising it. That's your question? Okay. Give me 1 second. I'm going to need to check the
Okay, 'cause
document.
you spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to get the property back and the franchisee out, but it seems like you ignored the fact that you had these properties in town that your business is with your name on it. And no one pays attention to who the franchisee is. I'm also interested in information with regard to how you handle other franchisees. I mean, obviously Burger King's a huge corporation and you have lots of franchisees, so this isn't the first time someone's gone bankrupt. If I start calling people around the country, other council members, am I going to hear other places where it's gone bankrupt and you've done the same thing, leave the properties looking abandoned, not do anything with it? Why would you, as an organization, a large, big corporation, allow your name to be besmirched that way by allowing the properties to stay in this terrible condition?
So the direct answer is the question, I was a bankruptcy lawyer. I was trying to get these properties back to Burger King Corporation so they could refranchise them. I actually believe at one point the Burger King name would have been covered. I can't speak to your question of why wasn't someone out there after we got control of the real estate to clean it up and deal with the issues. I can't speak to that because I wasn't there and it wasn't something that I was charged with.
Okay, well,
and I'm not making
perhaps
excuses
Ms.
for it.
Lansing can address that, or someone from Burger King can address that. I mean, the truth of the matter is, the properties reflect poorly on you guys, whoever that you guys
and
are.
The brand is an important issue
And
for the client.
I mean, I think that there's this effort to say, well, you don't understand. There's us, there's the franchisee, there's the bankruptcy court. Here's what I understand in real people's terms. The properties look terrible. You guys, whoever it is, Burger King, did not care and left them looking abandoned. And that you have lots of franchisees, and many of them probably file for bankruptcy, and so you know that this is going to be an issue, but yet you didn't step up to take care of the properties. That's my main beef with it. The drive-through thing isn't really an issue. It's that Burger King is a big corporation with lots of resources and has now looked bad in 2 neighborhoods in our city, and now you're saying, yeah, we've been terrible people on our property, but let us continue to do something that's not legal under your code. So maybe Ms. Lansing could address that.
We're asking to do something that is illegal under your code because it does allow for continuances of non-conforming uses, and we believe that we are still legally non-conforming. This is Katerina Gliptis. She can, tell you about Burger King and the efforts they're taking now to take care of the properties. It was overlooked. When you have no local franchisee who's at the property every day, that's what happens with vacant properties and why we should get these reopened.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for letting us speak today. Yes, I can say on behalf of that, we don't have franchisees that go bankrupt regularly. Paul could probably speak to that more, but this is not within my division and purview. This is the only one I've had in the time that I have been in this position, so this is not something that is common. BK as a franchisor is about 99% run through locally owned operators. We don't own or operate our restaurants ourselves. It's all through what is usually small business, family-owned franchisees. And in this case, there were issues that began before the former franchisee P3 Foods exited those restaurants. We towards the end there had been hearing that there was a lot of other situations that were going on. They weren't being able to pay their employees. They weren't able to order food from distribution centers. They were having a multitude of issues. So they themselves, I think, when they were the franchisees there, were not upkeeping the properties to the extent that they should have, as they faced severe financial constraints and ended up filing for bankruptcy and got converted to Chapter 7s later. And in the time after that, what I can say is what Carol said. It was an oversight. It really was. We didn't have local presence here, and it was an oversight on our end. As we realized what was going on, we contracted a property management company to come in and take care. We did a couple of things up front. We did what we had thought was securing the properties and had boarded up a little bit and winterized a little bit, but we didn't get to the point that we needed to. And in complete honesty, it was an oversight. But since this past June or so, we've had a local property management company coming through and being on property twice every 2 weeks and maintaining. We've resolved anything that came to our attention, any notices that we had from people coming by. We had resolved within a day or two of getting those notices, and then, as I said, throughout the winter had snow removal and have been doing landscaping. And I apologize that started not immediately once everything had happened, but we are trying to do better and look forward to continuing to doing even better than that, should we have the opportunity to reopen these restaurants and establish somebody who is a credible franchisee in the system who has a proven track record with us. Carol mentioned they're based in Chicago, but they do have restaurants in the area. They operate in Brainerd and in Bloomington and in some other parts of Minnesota, so they aren't that far away. Kevin Kinney, who is here with us, is the regional operator. So these are real people with real faces who would be owning and operating locally. And that franchise organization is one that is very involved in their communities, have nothing but great reports from the neighborhoods and associations that they're involved with in their other markets. And we know that should they be able to come in here, we would be in a significantly better place, and we would look forward to working with everybody together.
Thank you. Any follow-up, Councilmember Goodman?
I don't think it's relevant if someone good, you're saying it's not relevant if someone good is coming in. You're saying that the argument here is abandonment. So I'm just trying to figure out how long Burger King has owned this property for, and free and clear from bankruptcy, and why the property was not made to look better. Because if you were the council member of the ward of that area, you would be criticized by the neighbors after letting it sit that way, that the reward would be that they'd get to reopen, right?
Did you have any further questions from bankruptcy or?
Probably, but Councilmember Ellison.
I do want to echo my colleague. One of these Burger Kings is in my ward. I know the other one is on the south side, and there have been a lot of questions, and I've learned a lot about this building and the owner and the long-term lease, which was baffling to me. I think that I've heard from our attorneys that this is that you all have a strong case here, and that we're and that the best thing is probably to approve your appeal. But I do want to share that it is concerning that you have a building that sits on a corridor that has increased activity, that is a changing corridor. Small businesses from the area want to know that they feel an obligation to make the corridor look good, and yet we have a major corporation sitting on a corner in a sea of parking lot, boarded up, no minimal lighting, if any, and I spent the early part of my career before I was on the council as a graffiti artist. Graffiti on the building, but it's terrible, and those are the kinds of things that really they make the neighborhood and myself sort of lack trust in this organization that there's a lot of care that's going to go into this. What is the current timeline if approved here, and if my constituents weren't essentially asking for this space to be reactivated? I probably would be much more willing to take you all to task on how the space has been treated. But with that being said, what is the current timeline of getting the space activated, and if everything goes in your favor here today?
Sure. Yes, absolutely. So should everything go in the favor of reopening the restaurants, we would have to work through the planning procedure with the city, of course. And as everything gets approved and we get permitting at that point, it's about a 3.5 month build out. So however long it takes us to get to where we can kick off the 3.5-month build out.
If I may, there's remodeling required for the stores, but I think immediately both Burger King and Cave is willing, has offered and it wants to meet with you and talk about what can happen, right away. That would help during that transition time.
Thank you. And you all currently have at minimum access. Well, it sounds like you guys have access to the whole property, but you also have access to the exterior of the property, correct? I think myself, and I can't speak fully for Councilmember Jenkins because she's not on this committee, but if she's here, I would imagine a great first step would be the exteriors of the building, making sure that that there is lighting, that the windows are visible, that that there isn't sort of vandalism, not well done vandalism. If you guys want to invite artists to come paint the exteriors of your building, I can give you a list. But it would be great if the timeline for that could be less than 3 months.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. Agreed. And I think to clarify, thank you, Carol, for bringing that up. These restaurants at this point are so old that a lot of the equipment inside is not to Burger King standards. So there's a lot that has to be done to get them to a place where they can actually operate, which is why there's that 3-month timeline. We can't just immediately reopen the doors, unfortunately. But in terms of things that we can do to maintain and improve the exterior immediately, we are very much on board with working with you on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other further questions. Thank you all for your testimony. At this point, I'm going to open the hearing to other members of the public who would like to address the committee. And while we're taking these hearings together, I'm going to break them up by location. So I'm going to begin with the location at 3342 Nicollet Avenue. Is anyone here to speak to 3342 Nicollet? Anyone here to speak at that location? Not seeing anyone. I'm going to move on to the 818 West Broadway facility. Anyone here to speak on that? Not seeing anyone. I'm going to close the hearings on both of those. Let's see. Councilmember Ellison?
So it looks like we'd be moving to grant their appeal, correct? So I'll make that motion.
For both of them?
For both of them, sure.
Great. Councilmember Ellison's motion is before us. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. That motion carries. With that, we're going to move on to our discussion agenda. Item number 7 is an ordinance modifying the definition of affordable housing units to address the inclusionary zoning units and projects using income averaging. And I'll ask for a staff presentation.
Good afternoon, Chair Schroeder, council members. I'm Brad Carter. I am in CPED's Development Services Division in the Customer Service Center. The item before you today is a text amendment to update the affordable housing exemption clause in our park dedication ordinance. That ordinance has been in effect since January 1st of 2014, so we're just past our 6-year mark on that. The current language in the code is what has been in there since adoption, and it's basically exempts any residential units, new construction or conversions, where they meet the 60% of metropolitan median income requirements for affordable housing. So what they do now is they provide that documentation through an affidavit that's notarized saying either all their units or some of their units in their development meet that requirement. And then we remove that amount out of their fees that are paid on their building permits for park dedication. The text amendment is something that we had worked with, brought forward by our colleagues in CPED and our Housing Policy and Development Group. And it's basically to update the ordinance to keep the existing language in there, but also add 2 additional exemptions under the affordable housing to reflect both federal level changes that have happened in the past few years, dealing with a housing tax credit that went through the federal government that includes a concept of income averaging, and to reflect our recently adopted ordinance dealing with inclusionary zoning. So this is what we have before us today. I'm here to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman. Well, thank you very much. Councilmember Goodman is the author of the ordinance, so I'll invite her to speak a little bit more to it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I can't imagine there'd be any issue with this, but what I do want to say is that this is the result of something good happening. I mean, the truth of the matter is we've gotten permission from the federal government to income average to allow for 30% units in some projects. And as a result of that, that's offset by units going from 50 or 60 to 80. They're not just going to market rate. They're still affordable below 100%. So this would allow for that income averaging. I think that we want to encourage that as a way to get 30% units in the city. I think the ordinance generally has been pretty successful. We constantly hear complaints from developers about the cost of doing business in Minneapolis, and while I don't necessarily disagree with what they're saying, I think we do a lot of good things to encourage affordable housing to be built, and wavering out projects that income average, I think, is a good step in the right direction.
Council President?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is a great change, and thank Councilmember Goodman and the staff for bringing it forward. I do have increasing kind of questions and concerns about the underlying park dedication fee structure right now. I have neighborhoods where there's a lot of money that has been collected for parks, which is not being invested into our park system. And we just worked together with the park board to invest, $400 million into capital infrastructure in our parks. As we contemplate asking for sustainable building requirements and, other kinds of amenities from development projects, I think as we go forward, it's useful to just have in the back of our minds this idea of what are the priorities when we are asking for public benefit back from developments. We are very limited by the legislature in our options. So, I just say that because we had so much discussion earlier on that one individual project about what kinds of benefits do we want to see back from the community. This is one that has been a priority. So we are generating a significant amount of money from development for parks, a lot of which so far hasn't been spent. So I just continue to have concern about how this would line up among all of our priorities, and just wanting to make sure that as we continue to adopt more things that will add to the cost of development and therefore potentially add to the cost of housing in the future, that we keep in mind all of the things that we have in, currently being required for development. So I don't want to detract from this change, which is making it, which is supporting affordable housing by making it easier to build affordable housing under this current policy. So again, thanks to the council member and staff for bringing this forward.
Councilmember Goodman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to move approval. I do want to comment on Council President Bender's comments. I could not agree with you more, and I'm sure you know that. This park dedication fee went into place prior to the time that we did the Parks and Streets deal, because we did not anticipate gigantic amounts of money. And so it might be time to revise this in lieu of the fact that a lot of this money is not being spent in parks on new improvements. And the purpose is not to use the money to maintain existing parks, but they have to actually add park infrastructure. And I'll just point out, I kind of wish Councilmember Fletcher was here. I mean, how much longer are we going to wait for a park in the North Loop? They've collected so many fees, and still there's not been really any direct movement on it. So it might make sense to revisit that in light of the fact that the Parks and Streets deal infused $20 million into parks, and some of this money, quite frankly, has been spent on the commons. So it hasn't really gone to improve a lot of things in some of the smaller parks in the neighborhoods where it's supposed to be. So I agree with you, and maybe we can put our heads together at some point and talk about whether or not, since the money isn't being spent, maybe we shouldn't be collecting it. And that could then be a break to sustainability efforts or affordable housing efforts as we increase density going forward. Please don't have the park board members now call me after this has been televised. I'm just saying I agree with you, Council President Bender.
All right, with that, Council Member Goodman's motion is before us. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and that motion carries. We're now moving on to number 8, which means we're halfway through our agenda. That was a joke. We're now on the rezoning related to the Dinkytown project in item 1 and 2. With those being the applications being denied, I'm assuming that what would be the correct one with if I can get some guidance from staff?
Being that the applications required to build the project were denied, it would be most appropriate to deny the rezoning. That said, C3A zoning would not be inappropriate here given the policy guidance in Minneapolis 2040. But typically we wouldn't do the speculative rezoning if the project isn't going forward.
Thank you. Not seeing Council President?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know. I mean, this site clearly calls for C3A zoning in our policy guidance. I mean, I can see it go either way. We actually upheld the height, which was granted by the Planning Commission. We denied the FAR. Theoretically, a proposal could come in for a 10-story building at the allowed FAR under the rezoning. I mean, obviously, they'd have to apply again. I kind of wish we would have taken this up earlier. I would have moved it if I had noticed at the time. I had it in the back of my head, but I didn't make that motion then. So,
yeah, Chair Schrader, Council President Bender. This site is a combination of C1 and C2 zoning. So some rezoning would be required for a project to happen here. Whether or not we do that today or at a later date is at the purview of the Commission.
Councilmember Goodman?
Let me just make this case. C3 zoning is extremely permissive and includes uses that lots of people don't like. So if we turn around and change the zoning, there are lots of uses in a C3 without a development plan that could be even more alarming to people. I'm not going to go through them because I don't want to start picking them out, but you can imagine being the highest zoning allowed in any neighborhood. Someone could come forward and put in something that not the neighborhood or the council member, but all of us really don't like. So I think if we're going to make a change in zoning, we should do so with a project in front of us so that we know what we're getting, rather than where we're at right now, which is we're not sure what we're going to get. And perhaps you could mention some of the uses that could be allowed that people might not like. Maybe the staff could, I mean, where are gun shops allowed? In a C3A, right?
So the types of uses that people are typically really not supportive of are first allowed in our C4 districts. So things like pawn shops, gun shops, really like plasma centers, those types of things are first allowed in C4. C3 does have some limitation on the size of retail spaces. That's less permissive than some of the existing C2 zoning in that location, but it does allow for greater density certainly than what the C1 and C2 allows for. I think maybe one distinction would be tobacco shops. Actually, no, that's the distinction between the C1 and the C2. So that wouldn't come up here either.
I just think we should wait until we have a project in front of us to rezone it. It's going to have to be rezoned anyway with anything coming forward because we're not going to want a C1 or C2 use on the site.
Council President?
I think that's fine. I do think that our use table clearly needs updating. C2 has a lot of uses that I think are actually less preferred compared to C3A uses, although we've started to chip away at those because they're typically more auto-oriented. These are the problems we're going to solve with our built form overlay and all of the other things that are coming. So I guess, either way for today, but someday this site should be C3A.
All right, I'm not hearing a motion, so I will move to deny the application. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and that motion carries. With that, we have one item remaining, number 9, which is an ordinance relating to the regulation of existing off-premises advertising signs and billboards in regional sports facilities. This ordinance was approved by council on January 17th, but at the request of the ordinance's author, Mayor Fried vetoed the ordinance and sent it back to City Council on January 31st. The ordinance was then referred back to Zoning and Planning and is before us again. What is for us today was sent to us from the Planning Commission. This version of the ordinance simply repeals Section 544.120, but the Planning Commission did not accept any other amendments put forth by staff. Is there any discussion on this item, or do committee members have any other motions? Councilmember Gordon?
Didn't we have a motion from Reich before us last time that we were all supportive of?
We had a motion before us. That motion
the council
failed.
Appropriate. It failed here?
It failed here. I would entertain a motion that motion could come again.
Well, I'm not sure if I'm the one who should make it, so I just wanted to pause and remind us all that I think this is the kerfuffle represents a little bit of a misstep at the council meeting, and we had to correct it here, and so let's get it right this time, team.
Councilmember Reich.
I've clarified and re-clarified that the clerk has the proper definition of our intentions before them, and what we approve now would be reflective of what our intentions were in the first place.
An amendment needs to be made.
Oh, and I move that thusly.
Councilmember Reich's motion is before us. I want to make sure all my colleagues have a copy of that. Council President?
And this is an amendment to move the amended version of the proposal, correct? One motion. All right, so I'm not going to support the motion. We've belabored this a million times. I don't need to go into it again, but same as my previous votes.
Not seeing anyone else. I also feel the same. I've voted no on this quite a few times, so I'll be doing so today. Councilmember Reich's motion is before us. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? No. The ayes have it, and that motion carries. Seeing no further business before the committee, we are adjourned.